Here we are. Yep. Alright, cool.
Let the Galaxy Burn. Narrated by a Border Prince. Unthinking Justice by Andreas Millward. And those dedicated to the Emperor's work will be beset upon all sides by enemies. Be vigilant, for they... The door signal sounded. Codicia Levi, of the Librarius of the Imperial Order of Black Consuls, sighed and ran a hand through his close-cropped dark hair. Reverently, he closed his leather-bound copy of the Codex Astartes, stood up and walked to the window of his Spartan quarters. The landing lights of one of the chapter's ship's shuttles briefly illuminated his angular, clean-shaven features. "Enter," Levi continued, looking out of the window, contemplating the very starry backcloth before him, and the inauspicious verse he had read in the Codex. He spoke again, softly, on hearing his visitor enter his quarters. "A good day for the Emperor's work, Standard-Bearer." A short laugh came from behind him. "Your powers do you justice as always, Levi, but surely all days are fitting for his blessed work, brother librarian. Or does your faith wane in these dark days?" Levi turned to face his visitor. Brother Ariam, standard-bearer of the Black Consul's 3rd Company, stood smiling in the doorway. A powerfully built man, he was dressed as Levi was, in a black tunic edged with yellow. Levi gave a rare smile of his own. "Ariam, it's good to see you on this ill-omened day. Come in." Levi welcomed the unexpected appearance of the youthful standard-bearer. He studied the broad face before him, the scar that ran across one cheekbone and the bridge of Aram's nose. The deep mark left there long ago by a gene-stealer's claw may have faded with time, but the standard-bearer had changed little since they had last met. Decades ago, Levi and Aram had served together in the Black Consul Scout Company. Their friendship forged in tyrannid blood during the bloody and costly battles for Manor.
Alright, sounds like my audio is working.
While Levi's psychic powers had taken him to the Librarius,
let's see. Aram's
fearsome fighting ability had led him to being the youngest standard-bearer in the chapter's history. They met infrequently these days, but the inhuman terrors they had faced together ensured that the bond between them remained as strong as ever. Aram sat down opposite Levi, his muscular bulk dwarfing the plain wooden chair. "Ill-omened. So you've heard the news?"
Testing.
"What news?" Levi asked. He'd already picked up enough warning tremors during the previous day's preparations, but had not heard anything concrete about their current objectives. The 2nd, 3rd, and 4th companies had been mobilized, which suggested that the Imperium was responding to the gravest of threats. "The Black Consuls have picked up a distress call from Saracto. Nearly half the planet has rebelled, brother. The Emperor's hold on the planet is threatened, and we speed to answer their call. Captain Estrus will brief us later this morning." Levi nodded.
Awesome.
"As I understand. But this is grave news indeed, and explains the speed with which we were dispatched. Saracto has been a shining beacon against the encroaching darkness we face across the galaxy. An orderly, productive planet, as I recall. Unquestioningly loyal to the Emperor. We cannot let planets such as these slip from the Emperor's grasp." "You are not idle at the Librarius, I see," Aram said, though there was little humour in his voice. "Saracto has voluntarily yielded tithes 1/3 higher than all other neighbouring planets in the system for the last 5 years. To see such a planet fall to disorder and disarray is a near catastrophe for the Imperium." Levi nodded. "What manner of heresy threatens the planet?" "The rebels reject the Emperor's order and discipline. They claim his way is too harsh, too demanding. They seek a more equitable and just way of life." Aram laced his words with scorn. "Their heretical ways threaten to snuff out our shining beacon, brother Levi." "It shall not be so, Aram. Such a fundamental threat to the true order must be eradicated completely." His words hung in the air. Abruptly, the Codicia got up and extended his hand to Aram. "In spite of the circumstances, I'm pleased to see you, brother. As always, it will be a great honour to fight at your side."
We're calling on all late-night coders, early morning gamers, self-proclaimed space geeks, stargazing science junkies, and especially...
Levi sensed Captain Estrus struggling to dampen his annoyance with the newcomer. Less than an hour after the Black Consuls had made planetfall on Soracto, another ship had appeared from the warp, heading directly for the Space Marines' landing site to the north of the Hive City of Therum. The ship bore the markings of the Inquisition, and immediately on landing, an Inquisitor, together with a small detachment of stony-faced retainers, had presented himself to the captain, demanding that the loyal forces regroup with the Black Consuls in order to reassess the situation. Inquisitor Parax, I'm simply not interested, Captain Orestes was saying. His irritation seemed to deepen every furrow in his already heavy-lined, tanned face. We have made planetfall, but over 60 minutes later, we have still not fully deployed. Orestes fought to make himself heard over the rumble of the Rhino engines revving behind him and the noise of a nearby squad of tech marines and their blank-faced servitors loading missiles onto the company's whirlwinds. Inquisitor Parax's lean face registered no emotion. A slightly built man, clad only in his dark official robes, he struggled to maintain some semblance of authority next to the armoured Space Marine captain towering above him. While I appreciate the subtler points of the Codex, Captain, nevertheless, he began, but the rest of his sentence was drowned by the piercing noise of a land speeder squad roaring immediately overhead. Once the craft had passed, Orestes spoke at once. With respect, Inquisitor, the Blessed Codex is not in question here. However, your request to regroup is. We must deploy and go to the aid of the loyalist Surrectan forces as soon as possible. Administrator Nile, assistant to Planetary Lord Coln, will rendezvous with us in 15 minutes, and I am sure that he will brief us all in full. I am most grateful that... Orestes paused, choosing an appropriate phrase. That your eminence has chosen also to respond to the distress call, but we cannot afford to wait and give the rebels any chance to gain the upper hand. Parax glanced at the closed faces of a half-dozen members of his retinue who stood behind him. His dark eyes narrowing slightly. He gave himself a moment to think, then turned back. Very well, Captain Estrus, I accede, but I warn you that the Inquisition will frown upon any rash decisions you make. Orestes' face darkened. Inquisitor, I can assure you that the Black Consuls have never made any rash decisions. Company sergeants, prepare to deploy. He grabbed his helmet from a nearby consul and strode towards the whirlwinds. Levi watched as the Inquisitor and his retinue returned to their shuttle. An ill-omened day indeed, he thought. The arrival of the Inquisitor did little to alleviate the sense of foreboding that hung heavy over him. He hefted his chainsword, checked the armor diagnostic reading on his viewer, then turned to follow the captain. His face a mask of hatred, the rebel soldier brought his lasgun to bear on Levi. Reacting with preternatural speed, Levi stepped towards him and brought his chainsword down. The sword's buzzing rose to a brief scream before the man's torso split apart, showering Levi with blood. There was the faintest of sensations at the back of his head. Levi spun smoothly and squeezed off 2 bolt rounds. The 2 rebels behind him were hurled into the Rhino's sides, leaving a pair of dark smears on the vehicle's large, white tactical arrow as their lifeless bodies slid to the ground. Catching a glimpse of the console standard, he turned to see Aram, knee-deep in rebel corpses, calmly aiming and firing his bolt pistol, felling an opponent with each shot. Like the old days, Levi thought, before taking aim with his own bolter. The rebel ambush had caught the vanguard of the Black Consuls as it began to make its way to the rendezvous point, through the battle-scarred suburban wastes on the outskirts of Therum City. The ferocity of the rebels had initially caught the Space Marines off guard, but very quickly the attack crumbled in the face of the Black Consul's discipline and dogged defence. The attack was over in a few minutes, with no losses for the Consuls. As they regrouped and prepared to move on, Levi studied the corpses at his feet. Strange how he could not feel any hate for these, the kind of heretical traitors that he had come to loathe during his decades as a Space Marine. He had come to expect feelings of justified anger when dealing with such treacherous vermin, but now those feelings were oddly absent. Distracted, he strode over to the command rhino. Captain Estrus was, once more, suppressing his irritation with the person on the other end of the comms link. I don't care what you say, Commander. We have 50 dead rebels at our feet. You will need to reassess the territorial gains of the insurgent forces. No, it will not affect our ETA. Rendezvous in 7 minutes. Estrus pulled his helmet off as Levi approached and reached for an order scroll from the sergeant at his side. Brother Codicia, you gave good account of yourself. I'm pleased to see that your time at the Librarius honing your psychic skills has not softened your fighting prowess. He glanced at the scroll in his hand, arcing a dark eyebrow. I fear, however, that this rebellion has softened the brains of the loyalist commanders. Levi tilted his helmet to acknowledge the captain's remarks. I do only my duty as a black consul would, Captain. Distractedly, he looked over at the group of black consuls speaking to Erim. Yet, something troubles me. Estrus lowered the scroll, giving Levi his full attention. What's that, librarian? Are we to be beset by more foes before we meet Administrator Nail? I apologize for troubling you, Captain. I cannot pinpoint the source of my vexation. Very well, librarian, but keep me informed. This disorderly planet also vexes me greatly, and I do not wish for further surprises. Stay at my side. Estrus' helmet comm crackled into life once more, and he flicked the speakers on with an armoured thumb and listened to the voice of Inquisitor Parax. He sighed. Yes, Inquisitor. We proceed. No, remain in your vehicle. Administrator Niall was an imposing figure, standing only a few inches shorter than the armoured figures of the black consuls nearby. His crimson cloak fluttered in the breeze that blew through the ruined town, the bright colour at odds with the sombre blacks and yellows of the Space Marines' armour. The distinct sound of small arms fire and the more regular pounding of battle cannons drifted along the same breeze. Levi studied Niall's face as he spoke earnestly to Inquisitor Parax and Captain Estrus. The Administrator's young face seemed at odds with the premature grey of his long hair and neatly trimmed beard. They must all be killed, every one of them. Soracto has prided itself on its loyalty to the Imperium for decades, and we must eradicate every last vestige of the smear that they have brought on our good name. I will not rest until I have personally overseen the execution of every last heretic. He indicated the ruins around him. Every last soul in this town was put to death when we discovered the taint of heresy behind its closed doors. Parax smiled grimly, his face registering as little emotion as the action could allow. Admirable sentiments and noble actions, Administrator Niall, one with which I concur wholeheartedly. The Inquisition commends your zeal, and we will seek to aid you in every possible way. And commendable as these rousing speeches are, we do have the Emperor's work to do, Levi said quietly. Let our actions speak first. Self-congratulation you may indulge in later. The three other men turned to look at him. Levi saw a flash of annoyance pass across the faces of both Niall and Parax. Captain Estrus' eyes blazed into life, stirred by his fellow Space Marines' discipline and dedication. Codicia, Levi is right, Estrus said. Pragmatism must be our watchword. We must act now before the rebels can regroup. Administrator, what is the current situation? Niall continued to stare at Levi for a moment longer before turning to speak to Estrus. The main rebel force is on the other side of Therum City. They have made some inroads into the city itself, but in the main, the walls still hold. They are many, lightly armed save for a few battle cannons. However, their heretical vigour makes them formidable opponents. We shall be the judge of that, Estrus said. Let us use even greater force with which to crush them, interrupted the Inquisitor. Administrator Niall is right. Not one of them can be left standing. Estrus frowned. Inquisitor, I have warned you. You dare to warn the Inquisition? I have warned you that I will not brook any interference. We have the Emperor's work before us, and by Guilliman, none will prevent us. Come, Administrator Niall, we have much to do. Estrus led Niall away to the command rhino. Inquisitor Parax turned his thin face towards Levi. His dark eyes burned with anger for an instant before he regained his composure. He appeared to want to speak, thought better of it, turned and walked over to his retinue, calling for his armour. Levi turned to Aram, helmet off, cleaning his bolter. The standard fluttered in the breeze an arm's length away from the standard bearer, planted in a small mound of rubble. Aram looked up, caught Levi's glance and raised his eyebrows. Levi nodded slowly, holding the standard bearer's gaze. Then, as if controlled by a single thought, both Space Marines abruptly looked away and went about their own tasks. The Black Consuls were soon where they liked to be, in the thick of the battle, spilling the blood of heretics. The second and third companies had each advanced around the side of the city, whilst the fourth had moved to bolster the beleaguered loyalist forces in the city itself. Beset on both sides by the Space Marines, the rebel siege was beginning to crumble. A thick layer of battle smoke hung over the southern outskirts of Theron. The air was filled with a confusion of bolter and lasgun fire, the explosion of artillery rounds, and the screams of the wounded and dying. Out of the smoky unknown, 4 lasgun rounds hit Levi in rapid succession, scoring the ceramite plates of his armour and singeing his overtunic, but failing to penetrate further. He checked his IR scanner, found the source of the shots, and fired his bolter into the drifting pall of smoke. He heard the sound of the 2 bolter shells detonating, as his infrared imaging showed him that they had found their mark, and that more rebels were closing in on him from the right. 3 figures emerged from the smoke, lightly armoured men, their pale faces haggard with fatigue. The first was no match for Levi's reactions, and barely had an opportunity to register the Codicier's chainsword before it parted his head from his shoulders. The second man, frozen in horror at his comrade's sudden death, was himself torn apart by a bolt round. The third man paused, lasgun hanging slackly at his side, gazing at his own reflection in Levi's helmet. Levi paused, dimly aware of the buzzing of the chainsword in his own hand. A distant part of his mind admired the bravery of this rebel, fearlessly squaring up to an Imperial Space Marine. His sword began to describe an arc towards the man. "In the Emperor's name, brother!" Levi's sword arm froze. The man had not opened his mouth to speak, yet Levi had heard the words as clearly as the sound of the chainsword and the battle around him. He probed his own mind. A psyker. He felt the man's mind recoil, gathering momentum for a psychic blast. Instinctively, Levi unleashed a pummeling mental attack of his own, tearing the man's neurons apart. A small trickle of blood began to run from the man's nose before he fell to his knees in front of the Space Marine, his mind destroyed. Levi dispatched him with a single thrust before powering down the chainsword. As he stepped over the corpse, Levi became aware of the stillness around him. In the far distance towards the second company's position, the battle still raged, but in his immediate vicinity, calm had descended. Brother consuls emerged from the smoke, doffing helmets or reloading weapons. A cry rang out some distance away. Moments later, an armoured apothecary sped past towards the sound of the cry. A single heavy pistol shot rang out. Captain Arestus appeared at Levi's side, accompanied by his sergeant aide.
How's this for everybody?
Smoke prevents us from assessing the situation.
I hope everyone can hear me.
We've lost 2 of our battle brothers and 3 more are injured, against a foe far more numerous. That is to be expected, but reports are fragmented and I cannot see the greater picture. What can you see? Levi reached up for his helmet. There was a sharp hiss as his helmet seals released.
I hope everybody can hear me
the ancient
and can hear the audio
Levi
book.
breathed deeply and reached out with his mind, probing tentatively at first, then moving further away, gathering impressions, visualizing sights, sounds, smells. Satisfied, he moved his perception to the city.
Oh, man.
"Brother Librarian, what's wrong?" Levi gradually became aware of the captain's voice once more. Even in his armour, Levi felt cold. He leaned on his chainsword for support as a momentary weakness passed through his body. "Codicea, how do our battle brothers fare?" "Well enough, Captain. The second company suffers but gains the upper hand. For now, the fourth stands their ground. But I fear we have underestimated the rebels, Captain. The city, Captain." Arestus kept his voice calm. "What of the city, Codicea? It lies in dark shadow, brother Captain. The unmistakable shadow of chaos." Levi heard a bone crack as the Inquisitor's finger jabbed one of the prisoners in the chest. Tied to a charred wooden chair, the rebel winced, but continued to stare directly at Parax. His voice hoarse after nearly an hour of interrogation, the young man struggled to speak clearly to the armoured Inquisitor. "And I tell you that we fight for the Emperor, Inquisitor. We are loyal to the Imperium. We are on your side. I can't say it any clearer." The men huddled in the shadows behind him murmured in agreement. A glance from the Black Consul's guard at their side silenced them. Parax whirled and faced the others in the burnt-out room where they had assembled half a dozen prisoners taken in the first exchange. Drawn and tired as they were, all the rebels had said the same thing. They were loyal to the Emperor, and chaos had taken hold in Planetary Lord Koln's palace. Inquisitor Parax's impatience had long been exhausted, and a barely controlled rage tinged his voice as he spoke. "Brother Space Marines, Administrator, we can see clearly here how chaos warps the mind and sullies the soul. They are compelled against their wills, perhaps, to utter these profanities and heresies, even when the truth of the matter is self-evident. Soracto's peril is grave indeed." He paused and lowered his head, staring at the floor. Much as he disliked the shadowy flamboyance and melodrama of the man, Levi felt that he had to agree with the Inquisitor. Chaos had so warped the minds of these rebels that they must have had no shred of understanding left. A grave peril indeed. Before Parax could say anything further, the bound rebel spoke again. "The biggest profanity is that Chaos walks Soracto, clothed in Imperial garb, and..." Before the noise of the auto-pistol shot had died away, a dozen servo motors whirred into life as the Black Consoles instinctively targeted Administrator Nile. The Administrator slowly lowered his pistol, and at a sign from Arestris, Levi, Aram, and the other Space Marines lowered their own weapons. The force of the shot, hitting the prisoner in the throat, had pushed the rebel's chair over, and he had been dead before he landed at his horrified comrade's feet. "Such heresy! I cannot bear to hear it," Niall said, returning the auto-pistol into the folds of his cloak. "I have spent far too long building this administration for the greater glory of the Emperor to hear such filth spoken so brazenly." "You have my sympathies, Administrator," Parax said, gesturing discreetly. Two of his stony-faced retainers appeared in the tattered doorway. "Take these vermin away and dispose of them." Using the ends of their lasguns to prod them along, the two retainers began to herd the rebels out of the door. "Wait a moment." Levi stepped forward, an unwelcome sense of unease playing in his mind. "We must not be hasty." Parax squared up to the librarian. "You plead for these treacherous scum? Where do your loyalties lie, Consul? You do not." "His loyalties remain true, Inquisitor." Parax involuntarily stepped away from Levi as Arestris' iron voice cut him short. "Doubt it not. But my brother librarian is right. We may miss an opportunity to find out more about the deployment of the rebel forces if we..." A series of lasgun shots sounded outside. Arestris groaned. "Inquisitor, we are on the same side, yet your rash behaviour threatens to disrupt our operation here." "Are you sure that we're on the same side, Captain? Or has this cunning heresy affected you?" As the captain's hand moved to his bolter, Levi sensed a strong psychic presence approach the ruin. He heard the crackle of Chaplain Mortem's Crozius Arcanum moments before the battle rod and the fully armoured figure of his holy brother dwarfed the ruined doorway. "Brothers, we must move out," Mortem said breathlessly. "The second company is overwhelmed. A counterattack, Brother Captain, and it seems like the entire planet is against us." A barrage of whirlwind missiles roared overhead as the speeders of the second company's 10th squad screamed towards the heart of the rebel force. The rebel force had appeared unexpectedly from the south and was swarming towards a breach in the city walls. The missiles screamed into the distance. A series of explosions lit up the horizon. Satisfied that the rebels' artillery capability had been disposed of, Arrestus ordered the third company to advance. Aram, standard grasped in one hand
let's see
and
what we
bolter
got.
in the other, led the first and second squads into the heart of the rebel counterattack. Possessed of an almost demonic rage, rebels hurled themselves bodily at the Black Consoles, but their attacks were in vain as black armoured fists crushed skulls, bolter shells tore muscle and sinew apart, flamers and melter guns incinerated skin and bone. And very soon both squads struggled to make headway, their progress impeded by the waves of rebel dead at their feet. Levi tore his chainsword free from the dead rebel and in one smooth movement turned and hammered the pummel into the face of his compatriot. The blow shattered the man's forehead with an audible crack, killing him before his limp body began to fall to the ground. Kicking the corpse to one side, Levi followed the men of the third and fourth squads towards Theram's breached walls. Now he wished he could take his
Alright,
helmet off
let's see.
so that he could spit out the growing feeling
Testing.
of the rebels' hatred, for it had become a vile taste in his mouth. A
Alright,
deadly
testing.
hiss of meltagun made him glad
Come
he was
on.
still fully armoured. A
There we
wave
go,
of
it's
anguish
working
washed
now.
over the librarian as the black console next to him was reduced to dust. Levi
Dust.
scanned the enemy ranks for the weapon. There, less than 20 paces away. But there were too many of his brothers in the way. The meltagun fired again, and another console exploded into a superheated ball of flame. Time to fight fire with fire, Levi thought grimly. Brother consoles, hold your positions, hold your positions! Unquestioningly, the Space Marines heeded the Codicier's order and stopped in their tracks. Muttering a short prayer to the Emperor, Levi focused his mental energies on the ground beneath the rebel meltagunner. With no further warning, a white-hot ball of flame erupted upwards from the ground, exploding outwards, engulfing the meltagunner and a dozen men around him. Seemingly unfazed by the unexpected loss of their comrades, the remaining 50 rebels regrouped and charged both squads. A woman brought her auto-rifle to bear on Levi, but hesitated before firing. "Rot in hell,
Barely hear
spawn
me.
of chaos," she screamed. She opened fire,
Uh.
the gun on full auto, spraying Levi with bullets. Levi advanced against
I'm not
the hail of
talking much, I'm
bullets
just
that were
letting the
bouncing
audio go
ineffectually
quiet.
off his armour. Out of ammunition, the rebel battered
this?
the librarian's chest with the butt of her gun. "Die, heretic, die!" Her words were cut short as the chainsword sliced through her waist. Levi stared at the bloody severed torso. This is not right. It felt so wrong to kill her. Absently, he fired his bolter at two men charging him down, felling both. Something exploded a few meters away, throwing Levi backwards. He landed heavily. A stream of damage data ran up his helmet readout, but all Levi could see was the woman's face, distorted by rage and hatred. "Brother, can you hear me?" Levi tried to focus on the distant voice as a pair of armoured arms lifted him to a seated position. Apothecary Mordanian fumbled with Levi's helmet seal and removed his helmet. His lined face cracked into the briefest of smiles. "Ah, thank Gilliman, you are alive, brother librarian. I took your silence for death. A frag grenade." "What? No, I live, as you see." Levi still felt dazed, unsure whether it was the aftershock of the grenade blast or something else. "How do we fare?" "Well, librarian, well, we must have accounted for over 300 of the rebels."
I am
He
doing
examined
commission
Levi
work.
as he spoke. "The second has
3D
regrouped
printing
over there,
these
and we
files.
await the order to,
Problem is,
you
I
are
can't
wounded."
find the correct ones
Levi
they
became dimly
wanted.
aware of a discomfort in his right leg as the apothecary dressed the wound. He put the pain out of his mind as easily as if it was any other emotion. The apothecary helped him to his feet. "A few minutes, and the dressing will
How
begin
tiny
to...
these things
Oh,
are.
I must tend to another. Go well, brother." As the apothecary hurried away, Levi replaced his helmet before taking in the scene around him for the first time. Black consoles of the 1st to 6th squads of the 3rd
helmets.
Company were coming together. Within a few hundred metres of the city walls, a black and yellow armoured mass in a sea of torn and bloody rebel dead. He caught sight of Aram. The standard bearer was making his way over to him, pausing now
Let's
and
hope
again
I
to
didn't
speak a
just
few
crash
words to the
everything.
squad members. Levi checked his view screen reports before watching the 5th Squad sergeant reverently touching the edge of the standard before turning to muster his men. "Brother Aram, your inspiration
Well, you
gives
have
us
to-
all courage. The 2nd Company holds its position, but the 4th is beleaguered." "Yes, I saw the reports." Aram glanced over his shoulder. "We move to hold the breach soon. Brother Arestris awaits the word from Captain Venom of the 4th. Yet you seem distracted, brother." "Chaos so twists these rebels that they accuse us of heresy, of being servants of the darkness ourselves." Something close. The thought intruded abruptly. "I heard their blasphemy too," Aram shrugged. "But we must hold true, and must not be swayed."
They're finally...
Close. Aram's voice faded as Levi felt a large presence looming. He fought to pinpoint it. The clamour of human minds beyond the rise, towards the city walls. He opened a channel on his helmet comm. "Brother Captain, we are coming under attack, 600 paces due west. A large force, repeat, a large force." "Acknowledged, brother." The rest of Captain Arestris's reply was drowned out by a booming barrage of bolters as the black consoles opened fire on the seething mass of rebels approaching over the rise. Aram raced to join the 1st squad, firing with deadly
I'm
accuracy
not
as he
what I'm
closed
looking
with the
for.
attackers. As the standard bearer moved through their midst, a great roar rose from the ranks of the black consoles. Levi, powering up his chainsword, began to follow. The air was suddenly alive with sheets of electricity. Levi's helmet visors darkened instantly. Teleport. Raw discharges of energy crackled wildly as a new presence materialized amongst the rebels.
Is it?
It seemed to Levi as if a gateway to his darkest nightmares had opened on Sirachto. A squad of Space Marines had materialized in the midst of the rebel force, but to call them by the name would be a blasphemy. Their archaic armour sported all manner of grisly and morbid decorations, born of chaos-twisted imaginations and depraved urges. Belts made of skulls hung around one waist. A rotting, long-haired scalp adorned another's helmet. Razor-sharp spikes encrusted most shoulder pads. But on every suit of ancient armour there was a common symbol, the hateful, many-headed Hydra of the Alpha Legion. It was worse than even the Inquisitor had suspected. The rebels were under the sway of these foul Zentian warriors. Levi and his brother Black Consuls took all this in at a glance before turning their firepower on the new arrivals. A deadly hail of bolter shells rained on the Alpha Legionaries, but though the human rebels around them were ripped to shreds, only 2 of the Chaos Space Marines fell before they opened fire with their own weapons. The crest of the rise was consumed in a primeval savagery as the Black Consuls vented their long-suppressed anger at the twisted representations of the Emperor's warriors that stood before them. Levi hacked his way towards the Alpha Legion squad, a cold hatred coursing through his veins. He barely gave a second thought to the rebels he dispatched to the Emperor's mercies, until the slow, terrifying realization dawned upon him. The rebels were turning away from the Black Consuls and were also training their weapons on the Legionaries. Soon, both Black Consuls and Rebel alike were fighting a common enemy, the Alpha Legion. Levi tried to ignore his confusion as he fought to get closer to the middle of the fray, but abruptly the fighting stopped. Only the rebels and the Black Consuls still stood. Erestris strode amidst the carnage, a dying Alpha Legionary at his feet. The foul warrior's chestplate had been torn open, exposing a tangled mass of charred flesh and ruined machinery. His hand twitched. Erestris calmly pointed his bolt pistol at the armoured head. As the shot rang out, Levi reached his captain's side. He looked at the grisly remains of the legionary's head, made waste by the bolter shell. "Captain, we have been misled." Levi looked around at the drawn, sallow faces of the rebels, at the Black Consuls, already beginning to round up the ragged bands, their anger spent. The harsh noise of battle sounded from beyond the city walls. "Brother Captain, the rebel prisoners." Erestris raised a hand. "I hear you, librarian, and I understand. We have been made unwilling pawns in a dark and disturbing game. I must signal the fourth. I fear that Planetary Lord Khan's forces may be a graver danger to them than the rebels." He signalled to a nearby Space Marine. "Brother Sergeant, give me a casualty report and find me a representative from these rebels that I can speak to." "This is treachery!" Levi and Erestris spun to see Administrator Niall striding towards them. The Administrator flapped a hand at the stunned rebel forces. "They must be executed, every last man and woman. You heard what the Inquisitor said." His voice cracked as he shrieked the words. Erestris' helmeted head turned smoothly towards the Administrator. "You saw for yourself what happened here, Administrator Niall?" Niall hesitated, then nodded briefly. "Then you know the scourge of chaos is upon your planet." "But you can't see what's going on," Niall interrupted, exasperated. "The rebels have conspired with the Alpha Legion." "But the Chaos scum fought rebel and marine alike," interrupted Levi. That's what I mean. He rubbed a hand across his face. He seemed suddenly older, somehow, thought Levi. "You know your Codex, Space Marine," said Niall. "All those who stand with Chaos must be shown the Emperor's mercies." "All those who stand by Chaos must be given the opportunity to seek the Emperor's light, or be shown the just and swift mercies of those who do his work. That is what the Codex says." So saying, Levi strode nearer to the Administrator. Visibly shaken, Niall backed off a few paces. "Administrator, how is it that you have knowledge of our blessed book?" "It is simply something that I have heard." Niall backed away further, his voice faltering. "Your duty is clear. You must." The left side of Niall's head erupted outwards in a shower of blood and tissue. The rebel holstered his auto pistol and spat on the Administrator's still twitching body. I am Metago,
Dang it.
he said, his sunken eyes burning in his ashen, unshaven face. I am the leader of this detachment of my people, and I have heard enough lies and cant from these verminous servants of chaos. As the rebel leader hurried over to talk further with Captain Orestris, Levi looked down on Administrator Niles' corpse and mused on another verse of the Codex. Swift, unthinking justice profits you nothing. It shall bring you only misery and the tears of the wronged. He went to find Aram.
See where.
As the third company approached the city walls, a cold and grim determination had descended upon the Black
Discord.
Consuls. The fourth squad had been lost completely, and but 2 men remained of the sixth. The loss weighed heavily on their surviving brother consuls. Mitigo, whose men now brought up the rear behind the company rhinos, had revealed the unthinkable truth. We had endured enough, he told Orestris. Khorne simply asked too much. We worked too hard, filled with joyful love for the Emperor, but Khorne would make speeches demanding more, telling us that the Imperium would be angry if we did not increase our planetary tithe. Then, he said, the purges began. Loyal citizens disappeared as Khorne's arbitrators terrorized the planet. Criminals were executed for any crime, often on nothing more than an arbitrator's whim. Heresy was found everywhere. Heretics were rooted out of every house and home. And we knew it was wrong, continued Mitigo. The Emperor's law is hard, but in its harshness, it is just. There was no justice left on Seracto, and in our hearts we knew that Khorne was not doing the Emperor's work. It left us no choice. He indicated the dead Alpha Legionaries. We had no idea that the taint on his soul was this abominable. Mitigo's words had stunned the listening Black Consuls into silence. Each one knew what the implications were, but Levi knew that each Space Marine would be true to his training and his order. There would be no regrets, no accusations, no guilt. They had done nothing other than follow the Codex, however misguidedly. With their customary discipline and self-control, they would shift their attention to the true enemy, and the blessed book would surely guide them along the path of righteousness. All such thoughts quickly faded as the third company approached Therum City. The second had lost over 30 men, and their armoured vehicles had borne the brunt of rebel artillery before their own whirlwinds had eliminated that threat. Both captains had agreed that the second should remain where they were to protect against any threat from outside the city. Levi had joined Aram and the first squad as they crossed the field of rubble which marked where the city wall had been. Months of fighting had made jagged, burned-out skeletons of the city's fine architecture. Hundreds of bodies lay strewn, blackened, bloodied and forgotten along the pockmarked streets. They've made their own pretty hell here, Aram muttered as they advanced up Therum's central avenue, the valley floor of the blasted concrete canyon that stretched upwards to a sliver of skyline a kilometre above. Levi merely nodded silently as he listened to the reports that streamed in. Things changed dramatically with each passing minute. Captain Orestris had signalled to Captain Venom of the Fourth Company, who had made effort to contact the rebels' leaders. They in turn had spoken to Venom and had welcomed the new understanding, but not so the until now loyal forces opposed to the rebellion. As soon as they had heard what was going on, they had turned on the Fourth Company. As Levi calmly took in all that was happening, he realised that he had not seen Inquisitor Parax since the prisoner's interrogation.
Sorry about that.
Parax's overzealous fanaticism meant that he had his own part in the Zentian machinations that had entrapped them all. Were it not for the seal of the Inquisition, Levi would have suspected a darker motive for Parax's actions. Holy Throne, forgive the thought. Levi's train of thought was shattered as they drew near to a scene of horrific carnage. Hundreds of rebels and Seractan loyalist forces clashed in a sprawling street skirmish. The Fourth Company, an uneasy presence between both sides, fought stoically against the red-uniformed Seractans, but were being hampered by the berserk zeal of the rebels. Unarmed rebels leapt over their dead comrades to tear at the Seractan faces with their bare hands. "Codex preserve us!" Orestes barked. "We must restore some order here." He bellowed some orders and his squads went smoothly into action. The first and second squads broke off to attack a detachment of Seractan auto riflemen. Dozens of red uniforms were mown down as the consuls' bolters took their toll. Levi felled 2 men with a single chainsword stroke as, all around him, fellow black consuls fought with a refreshed, vigorous spirit. This was more than battle. This was atonement. "Librarian, they retreat!" At Aram's call, Levi looked over his shoulder to see several dozen Seractans breaking away. "Second squad, hold," ordered Levi. "First squad, standard bearer, with me." The first squad broke away in pursuit, a dark shape in his mind's eye. The vision disappeared from Levi's mind, but its meaning was clear enough. First squad, slow down. We must be vigilant. The consoles obediently slowed to a walk, the Surructans retreating from view. Advancing through the twilight streets, Levi noticed a change in the architecture around him. He turned to the sergeant. Brother, where are we? There was a pause as the sergeant searched for the right information. In Planetary Lord Khan's palace complex, brother librarian. Then we have another purpose here, said Levi. Squad, halt. Aram approached Levi. We have lost the loyalists. What's your plan, brother? Levi gave him no answer, but bowed his head as he sent his mind out into the dark buildings beyond. A dark, cancerous presence remained. They had not left. The Alpha Legion is here. A murmur ran through the Space Marines at the Codicier's words, and grips tightened instinctively around weapons. Levi focused on the presence, found a direction. That way, my brothers. The consoles made their way, in silence, save for the whirring of servo motors and the echoes of their footsteps, into the labyrinth of corridors that ran within Khan's palace, allowing themselves to be guided by the Codicier's psychic powers. Levi felt an icy rage rising within him. The rage he had felt when he first saw the Alpha Legionaries. He strove to control his feelings, even though he knew that his brother consoles must also be feeling the same anger. He felt the presence of chaos draw near. Nothing must now dull his purpose. Librarian, your arrival is timely. Levi signalled to his brother Marines to lower their weapons as Inquisitor Parax emerged from the shadows, accompanied by his ever-present retinue. What are you doing here? Levi asked, uncomfortable that he had not sensed the Inquisitor's presence. I fear that Lord Khan is held hostage by the Alpha Legion. Hostage? Levi asked. But Khan is himself a servant of chaos. Not so, librarian. Brother librarian. Shuttlecraft powering up. The sergeant checked his scanners. 600 meters northeast. Levi glanced at his own readouts. I have it. First squad, standard bearer with me. Inquisitor, do not impede us. Parax nodded slowly and allowed the black consoles to pass. The Space Marines broke into a run, armoured feet pounding the floor as they strove to cover the distance. Levi checked his scans again. Shuttlecraft preparing for liftoff, 20 metres and closing. The tunnels opened into a landing bay. The high-pitched whine of the shuttlecraft's engines, bearing the Surructan standard, filled the cavernous room. At the foot of the shuttle's entry gantry, a red-cloaked human argued vehemently with two Alpha Legionaries that loomed over him. As Levi took aim with his bolter, one of the Legionaries lifted his hand and placed a large gun against the human's head. The plasma pistol flashed, and the human was torn apart by a glowing ball of superheated flame. The Legionary seemed to look at the black consoles for an infinity. You have failed, console. Levi heard the words clearly over the clamour of the squad's firing. Aram had already covered half the distance between the entrance and the shuttle, but the Alpha Legionaries turned and fled up the gantry, the shuttle already lifting off the ground, its engines screaming. Get down! Levi shoulder-charged the standard bearer, throwing him to the floor, pinning him down as a white-hot stream of plasma poured from the shuttle's engines, incinerating the spot where Aram had been a second earlier. Helmet screens darkened as the landing bay was bathed in a bright light. With a monstrous thunderclap, the shuttle took off. Levi got to his feet. Brother Sergeant, contact the chapter ship. That shuttle must be intercepted. He glanced at the faint human outline scorched into the landing bay's floor as Inquisitor Parax strode over. His psychic discomfort was reaching the level of pain. Lord Khan? He asked the Inquisitor. The Inquisitor nodded. Yes, another dupe in this Zentian horror. He paused, staring at the remains of the planetary overlord. This is a grave matter, Consul. When heresy runs this deep, it must remain a matter for the Inquisition. But what if this has happened on other planets and other systems? Aram asked, removing his helmet. The Codex binds us. We must seek out such heresy. We cannot smoke them out too early, Parax said. Swift, unthinking justice shall profit you nothing, Consul. Too early? Levi asked, unnerved by the Inquisitor's use of that particular Codex verse. He gave himself a moment to collect his thoughts, checking a report. The shuttle had outrun the console ship and jumped into the warp on Soracto's dark side. Do you have evidence of other plots like this? Parax glanced at him. As I said, librarian, this is a matter for the Inquisition. Cross me at your peril. Parax spun on his heels and walked away. Levi started to follow him when an armoured hand came to rest on his shoulder. The librarian turned to see Aram. He released his helmet and looked around at his fellow black consuls, methodically checking and securing the landing bay. Brother Levi, we have done all we can, for now. Aram indicated Colm's final resting place. It does seem that Colm may have been tricked, as we were. It may be the time for you to let the Inquisition do what it does best. We have freed Soracto, which is prize enough, and Captain Arestus will require a full report. Aram gave a half-hearted smile. The Codex tells us to be vigilant, to actively seek out all manifestations of chaos wherever they may be. As Codicier of the Imperial Order of the Black Consuls, it is my solemn duty. Levi looked up at the standard in his brother consul's hand. I am not best pleased at this decision, he sighed concedingly. But you may be right. We have done all we can, for now. As he made ready to signal Captain Arestus, Codicier Levi remembered the verse he had read that morning. And those dedicated to the Emperor's work will be beset on all sides by enemies. Be vigilant, for they are everywhere, and you may depend on none but your brothers in arms to carry out his blessed work. Levi signalled the captain.
Let's see.
As the doors of his cabin aboard the Inquisition ship closed silently behind him, Parax wearily began to take off his armour. This time, he had narrowly succeeded in doing his master's work, though he was long used to the arduous nature of his blessed task. But if the extent to which chaos pervaded Soracto were to have become more widely known, he sighed as he put his armour away. Perhaps Exterminatus would have been his only remaining option. He reached for his robe.
There we go.
For now, the Black Consuls had played their part, and order had been restored. The other planets in the system were safe. Absently, he rubbed the Zentian tattoo on the inside of his forearm.
I am right now messing
Their
with
time was yet to come.
What's it called? The sleeve. I made a new sleeve for my life-size.
Well, that was pretty good, wasn't it? Thanks for listening. I thought that was a nice little story. I like that sort of stuff. Please remember to like the video if you liked it, and subscribe if you're not subscribed. And if you are subscribed, remember to hit the bell so you get notified when I do stuff. Other than that, thanks very much for watching. If you'd like to support the channel and my work, please consider using the links below. I'm on Patreon, and also you can become a channel member, and that will give you some perks
I found this
in the
YouTube
chats
channel
and
that
things.
just reads old
Otherwise,
audio,
remember to join the Discord as
Warhammer
well.
books.
That's where a lot of chat goes on. So
Like
yeah,
short
feel free
stories
to do
and,
that.
like, long
That's in the
stories.
description as well. I will see you next time. Thanks for watching. Cheers.
It's like 100+ different audiobooks, you know? Well, they're not like full audiobooks, they're just shorts.
Welcome to Rules Talk. If you want to
Alright, let's put this over there. And we need 16 of these.
The Wars of Vindication.
Yes.
The age of apostasy raged for over 2 millennia, during which time the Administratum and the religious order of the Ecclesiarchy tore the Imperium apart from within. The culmination of this period was Lord Van Dyer's reign of blood. Van Dyer rose to the joint position of Master of the Administratum and Ecclesiarchy. He brought terror to the worlds of the Imperium. Individuals that opposed him were assassinated. Systems that failed to pay his crushing tithes were virus-bombed into oblivion. Weak-willed bureaucrats were easily turned to his own purposes. And his great charisma as the head of the Emperor's faith sent the Ecclesiarchy's warrior orders on bloody religious crusades. Fanatical warriors vanquished those that Van Dyer deemed to be heretics and blasphemers. Eventually, many branches of the Imperium turned against the aging megalomaniac, resulting in the Wars of Apostasy. 5 Space Marine chapters and the armed might of the Adeptus Mechanicus fell upon the Imperial Palace in an attempt to end Van Dyer's reign of blood by force. In the end, Van Dyer's own bodyguard, the Daughters of the Emperor, turned on him after learning from the Emperor himself that Van Dyer was destroying the Imperium. Alicia Dominica, leader of the Daughters of the Emperor, beheaded Lord Van Dyer with her power sword. Others remained hoping to either ride out the troubles or to continue to serve their former master, spreading yet more corruption throughout the Imperium. It is during this turbulent period that the Wars of Vindication took place. To the inquisitorial representative from Inquisitor Jaeger. Subject: Death of the Grand Master of Assassins. A few months after the death of Lord Van Dyer and the end of the Wars of Apostasy, the Imperial Palace was once again rocked by the violence of all-out war. This time, a far more sinister element was involved: the Officio Assassinorum. Somehow, entrances to and from the palace had been barred, despite no order coming from the High Lords. Trapped within its confines, many had barricaded themselves in their chambers as the palace echoed to the sound of gunfire and shook with the force of devastating explosions. This period of violence culminated with the death of the Grand Master of Assassins himself. It was brought to my attention that the same day as this heinous crime, a package was delivered to the Inquisition. Contained within was one signet ring and a provenance written in an anonymous hand. The signet ring bore the seal of the Officio Assassinorum and was an exact replica of the ring worn by all Grand Masters of Assassins as a badge of office. The provenance, enclosed with the ring, claimed that the one contained within the package was the original, while the one on the finger of the recently deceased Grand Master was in fact actually the fake. An inquisitorial seal was immediately thrown around the mausoleum containing the Grand Master's body, and we set to investigate these claims for ourselves. If the provenance were true, then the ring on the Grand Master's finger would have a data crystal instead of a ruby. This did, in fact, prove to be the case, and threw into doubt the identity of the body that now lay in the mausoleum. If it wasn't the Grand Master, then who was it? Who was responsible for the package that led to this discovery? And where was the real Grand Master? The information stored on the data crystal was an Adeptus Administratum vault code. The Adeptus Administratum has vast vaults on Terra, hundreds of chambers holding some of the Imperium's darkest secrets. To locate any one vault could take someone years or even decades of searching. The key to finding a vault is to use one of the special archive servitors. These servitors are linked to a special memory slave that holds the location of most of the vaults. It should be stressed that for security purposes, the data bank only has the location of the vaults and not any details of what is stored in them. We requisitioned 3 archive servitors and placed a sensor beacon on each before inputting the vault code. 2 of the servitors malfunctioned. The first incorrectly plotted a course across a walkway that no longer existed and fell 2 kilometers, suffering irreparable damage. The second one simply disappeared. After a 2-week period, only one of them had successfully located the vault. Its sensor beacon indicated that it had travelled some 50 kilometers into the depths of the Terran hive. The entrance to the vault was blocked by a collapsed passageway, and an excavation team was needed to break through the rubble. In case we had stumbled into a trap, another servitor was dispatched immediately to investigate the vault. What we found was another dead body. The body of the Grand Master lay preserved in a stasis field. However, upon genetic testing, this too proved not to be the remains of the true Grand Master. Stored with the body was a document, which I believe was written by the real Grand Master. In the face of such overwhelming evidence, I can find no reason to doubt the testimony contained in the document, replicated on the following pages, which reveals widespread corruption within the Officio Assassinorum. My final conclusion is that the Officio Assassinorum is in dire need of reorganization, and like many offices of the Adeptus Administratum, it needs more rigorous monitoring. This will fall into the jurisdiction of the Inquisition, and we will be setting up a new department to carry out this function. The department will be called the Ordo Sicarius. I recommend, to avoid further embarrassment, that no traces of this should come to light, and Imperial records be amended to read thus. In the anarchic wars of vindication, the Grand Master himself felt the assassin's knife. Thereafter, the High Lords took special care to control the Officio Assassinorum, so that, in theory, only traitors and heretics need fear it today. I respectfully submit this report to you and leave unto your discretion how much information you disclose to higher authorities. By order of the Inquisition. Inquisitor Jaeger. The Grand Master's report. This document has been coded Security Level Omega-1. Failure to gain the correct security clearance will result in immediate termination. By order of the Ordo Sicarius. For 80 years I have resided over the Officio Assassinorum, and if this document has fallen into the hands of the Inquisition, then I have been successful. Then I have been successful in uncovering both the assassination attempt upon my life and the corruption within the Officio Assassinorum. I can only hope that the person reading this takes the appropriate action to prevent any further spread of this corruption. During the reign of Lord Van Dyer, I relentlessly resisted, allowing the evil man any foothold within the Officio Assassinorum. But as his hold over the Imperium tightened, it rapidly became obvious that Lord Van Dyer had somehow enlisted the help of the Officio Assassinorum. Several reports of dead and missing officials and dignitaries pointed toward involvement by the Officio Assassinorum. Of course, all the assassinations concerned were carried out perfectly, and no obvious traces of Officio Assassinorum involvement could be found. But, familiar as I am with the modus operandi of all the hidden temples of the Officio Assassinorum, there were enough clues within the reports for me to detect a pattern. Plus, all the deaths seem to be terribly convenient for furthering Lord Van Dyer's own ends. The question that now remained unanswered was, who was Van Dyer's man within the Officio Assassinorum? Looking at the reports of missing people and mysterious deaths, there was no one temple responsible. Some I suspected to be the responsibility of my own Vindicar temple, while others had been horribly mauled by assassins of the Eversor temple, and many poisonings could quite easily be the Venenum temple. The list went on, implicating many possible temples and making it impossible to point the finger in any one direction. This left me with one of two conclusions. The first was that the Officio Assassinorum had been corrupted to its very core by Van Dyer and his bribes and blackmail. This, however, seemed unlikely due to the veil of secrecy over the Officio Assassinorum, which meant that even Lord Van Dyer could only know of a few individuals within the Officio Assassinorum. The only other possible answer lay with the Calidus Temple. Using the shape-altering drug polymorphine to assume alternative identities, the Calidus Temple is notorious for the ability of its assassins to infiltrate other offices of the Imperium. Many a planetary governor has fallen foul of the Calidus assassins disguised as a beautiful courtesan or lowly servant. With such skills and expertise at its disposal, the Calidus Temple could easily infiltrate the Officio Assassinorum itself. The final damning fact was the presence of a man called Zeiss Jarek. As the Director Primus of the Calidus Temple, he was a powerful man within the Officio Assassinorum, and my arch-rival. Jarek was favoured to be the next Grand Master himself, but when the position became vacant, a cruel set of circumstances prevented him from taking up the post. At the time, Zeiss Jarek was engaged upon a mission, infiltrating a strong warband of Dark Eldar. The strange and twisted psyche of these beings meant that only the most skillful of Calidus assassins could attempt this dangerous task. Hence, Jarek headed up the operation himself. Jarek and his elite team of Calidus assassins hadn't been heard of for over a year, and many felt that they must have failed, probably with fatal consequences. This was certainly the standpoint that the High Lords of Terra took when the previous Grand Master died of old age, and the post was given to me. When Jarek returned from his mission victorious, he was dismayed to find the post that should have been his filled by me. both myself and Jarek were initiated into the Officio Assassinorum at a similar age, he knew as well as I did that he would never get to be Grand Master now. By the time I died and vacated the office of Grand Master, he would either be too old or dead himself, unless I should suffer a fatal accident in the meantime. But Lord Van Dyer knew of this rivalry too. He had been one of the High Lords of Terror responsible for giving me the position of Grand Master. Having failed to enlist the Officio Assassinorum to his cause through me, it would be an obvious move for Lord Van Dyer to use Jarek's hatred of me to gain a foothold in the Officio Assassinorum. Using the skills and resources of the Calidus Temple, I believe that Jarek infiltrated several temples. It seems that Jarek ordered the assassination of high-ranking officials within a particular temple and then replaced him with a Calidus assassin.
Jeez.
Thus, Van Dyer's evil corruption infected the Officio Assassinorum and spread like a malignant tumour. With the death of Lord Van Dyer, many offices of the Adeptus Administratum were being ordered to purge their own ranks of individuals suspected of siding with the fallen ecclesiarch. Jarek knew that the Officio Assassinorum was an unforgiving operation, which does not tolerate errors or failures of any form. A purge within the Officio Assassinorum would be utterly ruthless. Anyone, even if unwittingly involved in Lord Van Dyer's schemes, would fall. I realized at this point that my own life could be in danger. If I was Jarek, my next move would be to assassinate the Grand Master and use polymorphine to assume his identity. I set in place my own contingency plans. To avoid the fate that Jarek undoubtedly had set for me, I had the fake signet ring made and got a loyal Calidus assassin to assume my identity. Jarek's next move was just as I had expected. One night he and 2 other assassins entered the chambers of the Grand Master and killed my double. At this point, I elected to disappear. In reply to those who may query why I did this, I knew now what a weak organization the Officio Assassinorum was. If it could fall victim to a corruption of a few individuals, then the entire organization needed reconstructing. To do that, it would have to be utterly smashed first. I was determined to bring the Officio Assassinorum to its knees. Only then would it stand any chance of surviving at all. Together with a group of loyal assassins, I declared all-out war. Jarek may be sitting in the office of the Grand Master, wearing my signet ring on his finger, but I was still the Grand Master and a High Lord of Terror. Only I knew all the Officio Assassinorum secrets. Only I knew the codes that unleashed the Eversor assassins. Only I knew the hidden identity of every single assassin. Only I could gain access to the Officio Assassinorum's secret arsenals, containing some of the most devastating weaponry in the Imperium. Day and night, assassins loyal to me battled against the renegades. Eversor assassins stalked the corridors, the coded identities of renegade assassins programmed into their subconscious. My own Vindicar assassins lay in air ducts and hid in tall alcoves of the Imperial Palace, gunning down traitors with impunity. Hideouts were located and destroyed with lethal demolition charges, some so powerful that whole sections of the Imperial Palace collapsed, killing many innocent people. Many loyal assassins risked using weapons from the Officio Assassinorum's secret arsenal. Some were unstable or limited in the amount of ammunition available, but when fighting against opponents as lethal as a fellow assassin, if these tools of destruction could kill just one of our foes, then it would push the war in our favour. One by one, the assassins that had supported either Van Dyer or Jarek were brought down, until finally, only Jarek remained. I confronted him in the chamber of the Grand Master. I had prepared for this moment right from the very start. A haywire charge lay planted within the very fabric of my desk. A voice-activated sensor would detonate the grenade when I spoke the code word. My Exodus weapons were still mounted ceremonially on the wall. But one of these weapons was not a showpiece. The pistol was loaded and armed. Jarek was prepared also. He lay waiting for me, the war gear of the Calidus Temple ready. He grinned with glee, knowing that even a master of hand-to-hand combat like myself stood little chance against the long reach of his Catan phase sword and the dreadful brain-debilitating effects of a neural shredder. I said the code word, and the haywire grenade detonating, sending an electromagnetic pulse through the chamber. Jarek looked on in horror as the energy drained from his weapons, leaving them useless. I used Jarek's moment of indecision to pull the Exitus pistol from its place on the wall and fired twice. By this time, Jarek had recovered from the shock of losing his weapons, but his attempts to dodge were in vain. The tiny targeting computer inside each bullet were programmed to lock onto Jarek's heat signature and would follow him whichever way he dived. The first hit Jarek in the head, and the second struck his chest. Specially chosen biodegradable rounds ensured that the weapon that killed Jarek could never be traced. I removed the ammo clip from the Exitus pistol, replaced it with a clip of conventional rounds, and placed the weapon back on the wall. With this final deed, I had brought to an end the corruption within the Officio Assassinorum. However, like a gangrenous infection, I had been forced to remove the infected limb in its entirety. The Officio Assassinorum now lies in ruins, and I leave its rebuilding in the hands of the Inquisition. For my part in these events, I cannot remain completely blameless. I was foolish enough to think that the Officio Assassinorum could stand alone, and not fall to the corrupt ways of someone like Lord Van Dyer. I should have been on my guard, and vigilant. Like a sniper, waits silently for his quarry. I should have been looking for the seeds of corruption and stamping them out before they had a chance to take root. It is for these reasons that I cannot possibly continue to be Grand Master, both for the good of the Imperium and for the rebuilding of the new Officio Assassinorum. Inasmuch as I am a part of that old corrupt organization, it is impossible for me to be part of the new Officio Assassinorum. I can only hope that I have absolved myself in front of the Emperor. Only he can be my judge and decide whether or not I am worthy of his everlasting peace. Grand Master of the Assassins. Thanks for watching, everybody. It's just a little early entry into a series I'm going to do covering the Age of Apostasy in all its glorious detail, but this is just something to tag on to the end of that series as and when it comes. But I'm doing it now because I think it's a cool story. Good stuff from the Assassin Temples. Love it. If you'd like to support the channel, please consider using the links below, as these kind gentlemen did here. You can become a YouTube member or a Patreon on Patreon, or the other way around. Anyway, please like the video, subscribe if you're not subscribed, and hit the bell so you get notified when I do stuff. Other than that, thank you all for watching. I do hope you've enjoyed this. I'll see you again next time. Cheers.
You are a fighter, and this is your reward. Medalla, the mark of a fighter.
Let the Galaxy Burn. Narrated by a Border Prince.
Alright, come on.
Snares and Delusions
Alright, it crashed.
by Matthew Farrar.
Alright.
The town surrounds the
What's going
obscenity,
on?
and the obscenity is eating the town. It has no name, this elegant pattern of buildings spread out beneath the wind on the dusty green hills.
Move this.
It is an oddity on this world, this town of dove grey walls, which seem to flow up out of the ground, their smooth lines and gentle angles forcing the eye to look in vain for any
if
tool
you guys
marks
wanna
or
find
signs
these.
of shaping. Simplicity of shape and complexity of detail, like outcrops growing unworked
If you
from the
want to
soil.
watch this, guys, you should watch this.
But natural rock could
Arbiter
never
prints.
grow in the delicate mandala of streets and paths, flowing across the hillside
how many
in a
are
design
there?
so subtle that the eye can take it in for hours before it begins to
264
understand
audiobooks.
how much the pattern delights. Even the violence with which the obscenity has torn its way into the heart of the town has not eclipsed the art of its buildings.
Wait, is that?
Not yet.
Is that Camus Arcane?
Despite the craters blasted into the buildings, the smoke in the streets, the dead scattered upon the ground, despite whatever invisible thing it is that is withering the grass and trees and silencing the song of the insects, the place still holds scraps of its beauty. For now. The town has never needed a name. The Exodites speak of it as they ride their fierce dragons to and fro over the steppes and prairies, but they bring its uniqueness to mind without the coining of a label to go on a sign. For all that they are a warrior race of beast-riding and beast-hunting tribes, their language is the silky melody of all Eldar, and they are able to speak of the one little town on their world, its historians and artists and seers, without its ever needing a name. The obscenity is different. It drives its way out of the ground like the head of a murderous giant buried too shallow, buttresses bulging out from its walls like tendons pulled rigid on a neck as the head is thrown back to scream. Black iron gates gape and steel spines give an idiot glint from the parapets and niches. They are not there to defend. The thing leers and swaggers against the landscape in its own power, sure that it is above attack. The spikes are there for cruelty, for execution and display. The obscenity is being built not for subjugation, but for the pleasure of the subjugation.
There we go.
It is growing, as small bands of figures grow from dots across the prairie, advance and join up, and form into a procession through the streets choked with the stink of death. They can see their buildings being torn down, and the earth beneath them ripped up to furnish more rock for the obscenity. There are tough patches, cavities along the side where new chambers and wings will be added, and the procession, the armoured figures gripping the chains, and the slim, cloaked shapes staggering beneath the weight of them, passes the crowds of slaves, toiling in the dust, crying and groaning as the obscenity creeps outwards and grows ever taller with their hands. The town does not have a name, but the obscenity does. There is no Eldar word for this red-black spear of rock eating the town from within like a cancer, but it bears a name in the hacking, coring language of the once human creatures who drive the slaves ever harder to build it. It is called the Cathedral of the Fifth Blessing, and in its sick, buried heart, its master is her prayers. The air in the deepmost chapel was torn this way and that by the screams of the thralls, but Chaplain Dehane paid them no mind. The patterns on the warp-carved obelisk seemed to writhe, the lines and angles impossible to any sane geometry.
I'm gonna be trying
And Dehane's
to raise
eyes
money to
and
buy
brain
a
shuddered
better
as they tried to
computer so I
follow
can
them.
at least play Space Marine
There had
2.
been times when he had relished or loathed the sensation in turn, even times when he had screamed when he looked at the pillar, just as their mortal serfs were screaming now. That had been in the early days, when the word-bearers had taken up the banner of Horus himself, and Lorgar had still been crafting the great laws of faith in the Pentadict. Those laws had commanded
Really don't
contemplation
like
of the works of chaos as part of the ritual of turning, and now Dehane was calm as he felt the carvings send ripples through his sanity. A lesson in self-disgust and abasement he had learned in his novitiate. Realise that your mind is but a breath of mist in the face of the gale that is chaos undivided. It was a useful lesson. The time for contemplation was at an end, and he rose.
Why is stuff
The
not
screams
loading?
from the
Like, none
chapel
of my
floor
Steam stuff.
beneath the gallery where the word-bearers themselves sat went on, although their mortal thralls were being herded out. Perhaps a dozen remained, those whose minds had not withstood the gaze at the column, who had begun to convulse on the floor and mutilate themselves. The slave masters began to drag them towards the torturing pens. They would be adequate as sacrifices later. Dahane walked towards the pulpit, turned to face the ranks of wine dark armour and horned helmets, to begin his first sermon on this new world. The circle of worship laid down in the Pentadict decreed that sermon and prayers for that hour were to be about hate. There was a certain expectation in the air that plucked a little cord of pleasure at the base of the chaplain's spine. Of all Lorgar's virtues, hatred was the one Dahane prized most. The sea in which his soul swam, the light with which he saw the world. Some of the most beautiful blasphemies had been done in the name of hate. He knew he was revered as a scholar in the field. The sacristians moved to the dais below him and reached into the brocade satchels they carried. They began to array objects on the dais. A banner of purple and gold silk, tattered and scorched by gunfire in places, a slender Eldar helmet and gauntlet in the same colours were set atop it. At the other end of the dais, a delicate crystal mask and a slender sword, seemingly made from feather-light, smoky glass, a single pale gem set into the pommel. And beside them, carefully set exactly between the rest, a fist-sized stone, smooth and hard, that shone like a phoenix egg even in the dimness of the chapel. Dahane looked at them, heard the words in his mind. All will be at an end. An exquisite shudder ran through his body. He unclenched his right hand from the pulpit rail, gripped his crozius in his left, and opened his mouth to preach. And something happened to the revered chaplain Dahane that had never happened to him in his millennia as a word-bearer. He found himself mute. High clouds had turned the sky dull and cool as Dahane stood on the jutting rampart outside his war room. His eyes narrowed behind his faceplate, as if they were trying to stare through the curve of the planet itself. This race has been allowed to go on, Mir. It has been allowed to spread itself. They drink their wine on their craft worlds and stand under sky on worlds like this. They crept out across the galaxy like the glint of mildew. Mir, chief among his lieutenants, knew better than to respond. He stood at the door which led out into the rampart, hands folded respectfully before him. He had heard Dahane talk about the Eldar many times. Not even the whining Emperor's puppies are like this, nor the mangy orcs, tyrannids, beneath our dignity. But these things, these are an affront. To be assailed by them, it gnaws at my pride. His hand squeezed the haft of his Crozarius, and the weapon's demon head hissed and cursed and spat in displeasure. Only during the rituals would the thing keep quiet. Dahane twisted it around and held it at a more dignified angle. It was a symbol of his office, a chaplaincy in the only traitor legion to remember and revere the importance of chaplains. It did not do to show it disrespect. Dahane wondered why he had not been able to speak like this in the chapel, why he had stood grasping for words, trying to force thoughts to his lips. A sermon on hate, no less. And yet he had stumbled over the words, choked on maddening distractions, images, snatches of voices, the swirl of memories he was normally able to leave behind at prayer. The eyes of our dark master see far, Mir. And who am I to set myself up beside them? Mir remained silent, but Dahane was speaking half to himself. The words fled me. My throat was dry and empty. I am wondering, Mir, was it an omen? Do they prey on my mind because they are so near? There was a feel to this world, something in the words of our prisoners and spies. Perhaps the great conspirator planned from the start that it would end here, To end here, Mir. To bring the sacrament into full flower. Imagine that. I know you believe your enemy is here, revered, came Mir's careful voice from behind him. But my counsel, Antrachaeus, is still that the time is not yet ripe for you to join us here. Dahane's fist tightened around the Crozius again, and the head, now a fanged mouth and eye stalk, it was always different each time he looked at it, yapped and spat again. The fortifications are not complete, revered, and only 70 of our own brethren are in this citadel. The battle tanks and dreadnoughts are still being readied, and the dissonance in this world's aura has made auguries hard. We still cannot scry far beyond what our own eyes could see. Our bridgehead is not secure, revered. Do you believe this is worth the risk? The reports we had of Eldar here seem only to mean these savages, or perhaps mere pirates. We cannot be sure Varantha has passed near this system. We have seen no craft-world Eldar here, or Dahan spun round. And I told you, Mir, that it is not suspicion and rumours which have drawn us here this time. I could feel the slippery Eldar filth singing to me when I first heard the reports. I saw their faces dancing in the clouds when I looked from the bridge of our ship. What could this psychic dissonance you complain of be but the cowards trying to fog our minds and cover their tracks? These Eldar savages keep a thing called a world spirit, revered. I know what is a world spirit, and what is a stink of a farseer. Dahane's voice did not quite go all the way to a roar, but it did not have to. There was a jitter in his vision, and a rustle far off in his hearing, as the systems in his armour, long since come to a chaotic life of their own, tried to recoil from his anger. You were not given the sacrament, Mir. You do not carry the fifth blessing. I do, and I command you with it, and I tell you that Varantha is here, and this is our doorway to it. I have known it in my soul since we broke from the warp. Mir bowed, accepting the rebuke, and Dahane slowly, deliberately turned his back. High in his vision he could see a point of light, visible, even while the sun was up, their orbiting battle barge. A space hulk full of Chaos Marines and their slaves and thralls. Cultists doped with Frenzon, with their explosive suicide collars clamped to their necks. Mutants and beastfolk from the Eye of Terror, and traitors of every stripe. Seeing it focused his thoughts again. We shall bring down our brethren soon enough. The engines and dreadnoughts too. For now, fetch Nissan and have the latest prisoner train brought before me. There was a scrape of ceramite on stone as Mir bowed again and turned to go. And by the time Mir had reached the bottom of the stairs, Dahane was sinking back into reverie. He was thinking of the cramped, fetid tunnels within the walls of the giant canal city of Sanch 5, where he and Mir and Allium and barely a half-dozen word-bearer squads had lived like rats in the barrows for nearly 2 years, as around them their covert missionaries moved out through the cities and along the canals which brought life to the basalt plains, beginning their quiet preaching, their mission schools with their drugs and brainwashing rooms. He remembered the small chamber beneath the thermic pumps outside Vena City, where the three of them had listened to the agents' reports and pored over their ever-spreading web of traitors and cat's paws. He remembered cries in the tunnels, in particular the voice of Belg, the scrawny, cleft-chinned cult emissary, loud in the coffin-like barrows as he shouted down the passages. "We are lost! The missions are dying! Our rebellion is clipped before it begins!" Someone had shot Belg down in the fury before Dahane had had a chance to hear more. But he remembered the word that had gone flying through the base as the reports began to come in. Eldar. And the second, The 3 syllables that had not yet, he could barely remember the feeling, become sweet poison in his brain. Not yet become the black, burning obsession hanging in front of his eyes. The name they had not heard until the warp spiders had begun to hunt them through their chambers and drove them out to where the rest of the Eldar lay waiting with shuriken and plasma shot, fusion beam and Wraith cannon. Alema had gone down with a lightning-wrapped witchblade through his gut, and Dahane had barely managed to drag himself and Mir away to the teleport point. Verantha. Oh, he remembered. 21 centuries of remembering. He remembered the sick anger that had seized him when he first spoke to the Imperial scholar they had captured as the wretch thrashed on the torture rack. Verantha meant crown of our steadfast hopes. Human traders spoke in awe of the gems it crafted, the rare flowers it bred, the beautiful metals its artisans worked. Verantha had passed through the western galactic margins, scraping the borders of the Halo, where not even the traitor legions went. Verantha that was supposed to have passed through Hydra 4 itself, the home of the Imperial Battlefleet Pacificus, coasting through the system's intricate double ecliptic and away again, before the wry-faced Imperials had even a suspicion it had been there. Verantha that hated chaos with a white heat. Verantha that had held off Carlson of the Night Lords in his raids on the Claven Belt until the Ultramarines had arrived. Verantha, whose Farseers had tricked and feinted to lure the orcs of Wa Chobog into falling on the Iron Hands fortress on Teria Shodan instead of the Imperial and Exodite worlds around them. Verantha, whose warriors had driven Arthandros, the Silken Whisper, off the free worlds he had claimed for Slanesh. And Verantha that had balked at the word-bearers on Sanch 5, had unravelled their plans and made sure the great citadels and halls they would have built could never be. A Verantha Witchblade had cut down Dahane's mentor. Verantha's Wraith ships had driven their battle barges and strikers out of the system, and when they had broken free of the warp outside the Cadian Gate, ready for their final jump back to the Eye of Terror and Sanctuary, it had been Verantha craft which had led the fleets of Ulthwé and Cadia, driving into the Chaos Fleet like bullets tearing into flesh. Fighting Verantha, stalking the craft world through a quarter of the galaxy, Dahane had discovered a capacity for hate he had never realised that even a traitor marine could possess. Every battle against the craft world had been like a stroke of the bellows, fanning it even hotter. The orbital refineries at Ray, where the Eldar had lured Dahane and his warrior band in, then disappeared, leaving the word-bearers in the abandoned gene-stealer-infested satellite compounds. The island chains of Areno's world, where their Doom Blaster had smashed the Eldar Psykers into the ocean in the campaign's opening, and Dahane had led a joyous hunt through the jungles, mopping up the scattered and leaderless Guardians. And at the last, the Farseer, staggering beneath the red-black clouds of Lante as artillery flashed and boomed across the distant horizon. Watching Dahane as he circled it, stepping over its dead bodyguard, the calm resignation in its stance, and the cold precision of its voice. "So tell me then, what do you see for us, little insect?" Dahane had taunted. "Why, you will set your eyes on the heart of Verantha, and all will come to an end," it had replied, before a howling strike of Dahane's Crozius had torn it in half. He had felt the Spirit Stone shudder and pulse as he tore it free of the thing's breastplate, and a sound like cracking bone. And he wondered, every so often, if the creature's soul was aware of who owned its stone now. He hoped it was. It had been long after that he had been called to receive his sacrament. The sacrament of the fifth blessing. The highest priests of his chapter had recognized the depth of his spite and praised him for it. The fifth blessing was hate, and the sacrament had appointed Dahane a holy vessel, freed from his duties in order to lead a crusade that he might express that hate to the utmost. A great hymn to Lorgar carved across the galaxy in Varenfa's wake. He can never think back on his sacrament without the hot red flames of pride flaring deep in what he thought was his soul. He walked to the edge of his rampart and watched the slaves toiling at the walls far below. His arms convulsed as though he could already feel Eldar souls pulsing and struggling in his fingers, and the wave of malice which surged up his spine made him almost giddy. Revered. Dahane started at the voice and spun round. His Crozius head, now some kind of grotesque insect, chittered something that sounded almost like words. He ignored it and found his concentration again. What have the threads of fate brought us, Nessun? The other Marine hesitated. Nessun was no full-fledged sorcerer, as the adepts of the Thousand Suns were, but by Lorgar's grace, he had developed a spirit sight that could scry almost as well as the Eldar warlocks they hunted. The mutation that had given him his warp eye had pushed it far out and up onto his brow, making an ungainly lump of his head. The ceramite of his armour had turned glass clear over it, but Dahane and the others had long ago become used to the way the great milky eyeball pulsed and rolled between the horns of Nessun's helm. In the way of the Eldar, revered, there is little I can say for definite. I see shadows at the corners of my vision and echoes that I must interpret. You know that nothing is certain with these creatures. Describe these shadows and echoes, Nissan. I am patient. I have kept my gaze on the tribes here in the days since our first landing, revered, and watched as they fought our thralls and Brubba Trika's vanguard force. There is a texture to them that I have taught myself to recognize by Lorgar's grace. But I have caught ripples, something dancing out of sight. I'm not sure how I can explain it, revered. Imagine a figure standing just beyond the reach of light from a fire, so that sometimes its shape is touched by the firelight. I think I understand. Dahane wasn't aware that he had tensed until he felt his armour alive, like his helmet systems shiver and creak as he tried to find a comfortable position. Revered, I am abased and humble before the foul glory of chaos, but I must venture the guess that Craftworld Eldar may be here on this world. I have dimly seen the patterns that the minds of Farseers form when they assemble, and I have felt gaps in my vision that I believe are warp gates. Warp gates here and in orbit beyond the planet from our own ship that have opened and closed and that they have not been able to hide. He stopped short as Dahane drove gauntlet into fist, hissing with triumph, sending his armor shivering and flexing from the blow. An omen! My voice was bound in the chapel as an omen. And he was about to speak again when Mia called from the war room. My revered lord, the prisoners await you. There was something in Mia's voice that made Dahane almost run for the doorway. Two Eldar stood in the great hall, heads bowed as Dahane strode to his throne and sat down, Crozius across his knees. The arm of one hung brokenly, blood matted the other's hair. Both were dressed in the rough cloth and high tunics, and their lasers, the power chambers smashed, had been hung around their necks. Traker, the commander of their vanguard, and Raptors bowed to Dahane and made the sign of the eightfold arrow with the hand that had fused to his chainsword. Traker's legs had warped and lengthened too, now bending backwards like an insect's. The armour over them lumpy and stretched. It had made him fleet of foot, but gave him an odd, tilted way of standing. "We found these in the southwest quarter where the hills steepen. We thought we had cleansed the area, revered, but these were part of an ambush on one of our scouring forces. The fight was fierce, but we carried the day." "Praise Lorgar's dark light and the great will of chaos," Dane intoned, and the two were led away into the cathedral cells. Traker gestured and a third alien was dragged up the steps, limping and tripping. The thrall holding its chains tossed a dead powerlance and a tall bone helm onto the floor. The prisoner did not react, standing slumped with its hair in its face, its long cloak of golden scaled hide hanging limply around it. "The last survivor of a group of dragon knights we believe were scouring the northern border of our controlled zone. I will attend to the tormenting of this one personally, revered. I felt sure that our deep raids had gutted the last of the Exodites' resistance on the prairies. We must find out how this new raid was organized so soon." The thrall began to drag the knight out, and Mia walked over to stand beside the throne. "Revered, this is the final prisoner. It was badly wounded and did not survive the journey back to be brought before you, but we believe you would want to see it. The raptors brought it down in the river valley to the south, and our bikers brought it here with all haste." With a scraping groan of wheels, the thralls pushed forward an iron frame with a figure stretched in it, a figure whose rich purple and gold armour caught the sunlight coming through the still unglazed windows and gave off a burnished glow. Behind it 4 more, strong beastfolk these, whose muscles rippled and corded with their burden, dragged something into view and dropped it crashing to the floor, stirring rock dust that still coated the hall from its building. A jet bike, its canopy cracked open by bolt shells, the drive smashed and burnt from its crash, but the pennons hanging from its veins perfectly clear, the stylized crown and starburst of Varantha. For a long moment, Dane was silent. Then he threw his arms wide as though he were about to embrace the corpse and gave a bellow that echoed through the length of the hall. "All will come to an end. Horus's eye, but the filthy little creature spoke the truth. The craft world's heart. It is here. The sacrament ends here, my brethren. I will end it here." "Revered." Dane did not look back. His stride had lengthened as his pace had picked up, and he was practically jogging through the halls to the deepmost chapel. Mia and Nessun shouldered one another aside to keep up. The air in the fortress shivered as the great gongs that had hung over the barracks rang out, again and again. Under the sound, Dane left a trail of angry murmurs in the air, curses and threats and dark prayers. Every so often, he would slash his croziers viciously around him as if to knock the air itself out of his path. He knew what Mare would be saying. More weak-spirited yapping, more about caution and rashness and the trickery of the Eldar. But the warp gate was close. Varantha was close. The time when the heads of the Varantha Farseers were set on spikes atop his Land Raider was a breath away. Why, you will set your eyes on the heart of Varantha, and all will come to an end. The heart of the craft world, the very heart of Varantha. He wondered how it would feel, walking from the Webway Gate into Varantha himself. The domes, where the most ancient of the Farseers sat, their flesh crystallized and gleaming like diamond, waiting for the blow of an armored fist that would send their souls screaming into the warp. The grove of new songs, that was what they called the forest hall deep in Varantha, where the few Eldar children were born and weaned. Dahane had spent 100 weeks agonising over whether he would kill the children or take them as slaves after he had poisoned and burned the trees. The Infinity Circuit, the Wraithbone core, which held the spirits of 1 billion dead Eldar, had shone through his dreams like a galaxy aflame. Oh, to crack its lattice with his Crozius and watch the warp tides pour in. It would need a special ceremony, the culmination of his crusade and sacrament, something he would have to plan. And was Varantha possessed of engines? A world that could control its drift and sweep through space? He had never been able to discover that, but he had begun turning the idea over feverishly as he strode down the hallway to the chapel. To take command of Varantha, hollow out its core of Eldar souls, and fill them with sacrifices and the cries of demons, to sail the fallen craftworld to the Eye of Terror itself. His head swam with the audacity. A world that would put the demon world fortresses and the asteroid cemeteries at Malario to shame. A corrupted world that would carry them through the galaxy. A great blight that would stand as a testament to the faithful. Their hate, their spite, their unholiness. The rest of the traitor marines began to file in and take their places, and the slave choir in the cells beneath the chapel floor raised a hymn of howls and cries as the choir masters puffed drugs into their faces and yanked on the needles in their flesh. Dahane closed his eyes and could see the conquered Varantha still, a great twisted flower of black and crimson sprawled against the stars, the shapes of the spires and the walls, great plazas where the zealous would come to plead for the favour of chaos. The cells and scriptoria where Lorgar's holy Pentadict would be copied and studied, the fighting pits where generations of new word-bearers would be initiated. There would be pillars and statues greater than those he had raised after driving the White Scars from the island chains of Morag's world. There would be chamber after chamber of altars more richly decorated than those they had seized when they had sacked the treasury of Kintar. There would be the slaughtering pens for the worship of Khorne, the great libraries and chambers for meditating upon the lore of Tzeentch. There would be palaces of incense and music dedicated to Slaanesh, and cesspits for the rituals of self-defilement dedicated to Nurgle. And all just parts, even as the Chaos Gods were just facets, all parts of the greater treacherous hymn, an obscene prayer in Wraithbone, carved in ceramite, the sacred city of Chaos Undivided. Dahane cradled his vision lovingly in his mind, and saw that it was good. Lorgar is with us, chaos is within us, damnation clothes us, and none can stand against us. Voices around the chapel echoed the blessing as Dahane held his rosarius aloft and made the sign of the eightfold arrow. For the second time that day, he looked out over the ranks of helms, leaned forward to look down at the bright eyes of the cultists and beastfolk crowded below him. But this time, his thoughts and his words were clear. Be it known to you, most devout of my comrades in Lorgar's footsteps, that we are gathered here once again in the observance of the fifth blessing of Lorgar, the blessing of hate. Bring your thoughts to the sacrament granted to me by the Most High of our order, that I might light a dark beacon of spite for all the cosmos to see. He paused, looked down again. The Eldar artifacts had gone from the dais, locked away again by the sacristans. It was not important. He did not need them now. Hatred earned me the great and honoured sacrament. Hatred has pleased the beautiful abomination of Chaos Undivided and shone a light through the warp to Varantha. My beautiful hatred has brought us to their scent. After more than 2 millennia, the fulfillment of our sacred charter is near. The memory of the Varentha Guardian, the knowledge of what they had found here, surged through him afresh. His head spun. His joints felt weak with exhilaration. His Crozius head, as he raised it, was now a contorted nightmare face, grimacing as if in ecstasy, mirroring his feelings. Soon we will be joined by our brothers, our fellow warriors and bearers of Lorgar's words. Even now, the order goes out to land our machines of war, our bound dreadnoughts. Within the week, my congregation, this world will have felt the full fury of our crusade, and when the Exodites are scoured from it, we shall march through the warp gate into the craft world itself. Hone yourselves, my acolytes, hone your spite and fan your hate to its hottest, most bitter flame. None shall pass us in our devotion, none are as steeped in poisoned thoughts as we. His voice hammered out and boomed against the walls of the chapel, intoxicating even with the power of its echoes. Dane fought back and urged to laugh. He felt so right. In the beginning, even in the days before my pursuit earned me the sacrament, I had spoken to one of the degenerate Farseers the Eldar claimed to revere. At its death, the maggot spoke a prophecy that the blessed oracles of our high temples have sworn to be true. Brethren, as I lead you to battle, I will set my eyes on the heart of Varantha, and then all will come to an end. I will cut down their last Farseer. I will break open the seals of their infinity circuit. I will shatter the heart and the eye of their home. His voice had risen to a roar. All will come to an end. Our crusade, our sacrament fulfilled. The Eldar themselves have sworn it will be so. What honors, what glory we will build. Above him, the gong rang again, and Dahane opened his eyes and leaned forward. Luck to your weapons, brothers. I will lead you now in the Martio Imprimus. I tell you this, by the end of even this day, we will be at war. The chant of the Martio Imprimus was an old song, and a good one, crafted by Lorgar himself in the days before the Emperor had turned on his word-bearers, and when even Dahane had been only a young-blood initiate. The words were strange, and their meanings almost lost, but they filled him with a beautiful, electric energy. It rang in Dahane's blood even now. The service in the deepmost chamber had been over for an hour, but the word-bearers had caught something of their chaplain's mood, and as the teleport beam sent thundercracks and sickly shimmers of light through the Citadel's hangar, the Marines chanted still as they selected weapons and directed thralls to moving crates and engines away. Duxa! The Crusade's chief artisan, still swaying a little from his teleport, turned as Dahane called him. He stepped back into a deep kneeling bow as Dahane strode across the hangar floor and left the moving of the icon-encrusted Razorback tanks to his second. Is it true, revered lord? I was told you have received omens and that Varantha itself is in our grip. They are singing hymns in all the halls and chambers of our fortress. Look. The old marine pointed to the nearest tank's turret, where splashes of blood glistened. They have already made sacrifices over our war gear. It is true, Druxar, and it is fitting that our brethren in orbit are making their thanks and obeisances. Lorgar has exalted us. I have been shown the way. Duxar had worked on his armour himself over the centuries, making it a glorious construction of red and gold. Chaos had worked on it too. The studs and rivets on its carapace had all turned to eyes. Yellow, slick-pupil eyes, which stared at Dahane now, but rolled forward to watch Mir walk into the hangar. Dahane pointed to the Razorbacks. Give praise, Mir. See how Brother Duxar's skill have transformed these. Captured barely a year ago and already adorned and consecrated for service. These will carry Triker's vanguard squads into the teeth of the Varantha lines. Our revered chaplain's own land raider will be brought down next, put in Druxar. and the transports are being ready to bring down the dreadnoughts and rhinos. We will be ready to move soon. A dark blessing on you, brother, and thanks to the great foulness of chaos. Revered, I must make a report. Well? Dahane was becoming nettled by Mir's manner, his shifty-eyed caution. He could see in the corner of his eye that Duxair had registered the offhand greeting also. Revered, we have lost contact with our patrols at the furthest sweep of the contested zone. I had our adepts move the communications onto the outer balconies, but there is still no way to raise them. The Raptors who went out to counter-strike at the areas where our own forces were ambushed cannot be reached either. The bike squadron was due back 2 hours ago but cannot be seen. The psychic haze has thickened. The Neeson's warpie is almost blind. He reports a presence like a light through fog, but he cannot pinpoint it. I will come to the war room here. Wait for me there. His lieutenant backed away, bowed and departed. Something in the air on this world turns my warriors to water ducks air. They whimper to me of caution and fortification. Mir is a good warrior, but I should have made you my lieutenant for this world. I need your ferocity by me here. Duxair bowed. I am honored, revered. Lieutenant or no, I will gladly fight by your side. Allow me to prepare my weapons and I will meet you in the war room. Dahane nodded and waited a moment more, allowing the chanting of the traitor marines to soothe his ruffled nerves, before he strode away. Nissan was standing quietly in the war room when Dahane entered, head bowed, warpie clouded. Maya and Tracker were pacing, almost circling each other, clearly at odds. Dahane ordered them to report. Something is coming, revered. Maya began. The slaves are restless. There have been revolts on the building crews. The Eldar know something. We must prepare for assault. We must make the assault. Tracker's rasping voice. We are word bearers, not iron warriors. We do not skulk behind walls. We take Lorgar's blessing to our enemies, his blessings of hate and fire and blood and agony. The obscenely long fingers of Tracker's left hand flexed and clenched, as if to claw the tension out of the air. Listening to them, Dahane hesitated. For the first time, he felt a tug, a tilt at the back of his mind that he could not identify. He could not see with Nissan's precision, no seer he, but 10,000 years in the Eye of Terror had turned him to the coarser ebbs and flows as it had them all. Something was near. He raised his croziers for silence, its crown a snarling hound's head now. He looked to Nissen. Speak, Nissen. Stare through these walls. Tell me what you see. Revered. I'm not sure. There are patterns. Something moving. A ring, a wall. Closing or opening. Cannot say. A mind. Shapes. Silent, rushing air. His voice was becoming ragged, and Dahane cut him off. It's clear enough, Mayor. Tracker, you are both right. The Eldar know of us. He fought back a chuckle. And they fear us. Catch us off guard, would they? A quick strike at the head, was it? Drive me off their trail? And now he did laugh, feeling the tension lifting from his back. Time for our sortie, my brothers. Have the Razorbacks brought to the ramp. Tracker, assemble your veteran squads. Maya, have our space command ready a bombardment for when we... That was when the first plasma blast hit the side of the cathedral, with a sound like the sky being torn apart. The thunderous roar died away amidst vast dust clouds, the groan of masonry, frenzied shouts from up and down the halls. Dahane stared straight ahead for one speechless moment, then hurled himself to the balcony, the others behind him, and then they could only stand and watch. The world had filled with enemies, sleek Eldar jet bikes arrowed down from the sky to whip past the walls of the cathedral, and high above Dahane could hear the rumble of sonic booms as squadrons of larger Eldar assault craft crisscrossed overhead. With sickening speed, each distant blur in the air would grow and resolve into a Raptor sleek grav tank, arcing in silently to spill a knot of infantry into the town before they rose and banked away again. In what seemed like a matter of heartbeats, the fortress was ringed by a sea of advancing guardians, their ranks dotted with gliding gun platforms and dancing war walkers, and the air swarmed with Eldar craft. The aliens' assault started to be answered. Thumps and cracks came from the wall as the word-bearers brought heavy weapons to bear, and threads of tracer fire began reaching out to the purple and gold shapes that danced past on the wind. Dahane pushed to the edge of the balcony, heedless of the shapes above him and greedy for the sight of fireballs and smoke trails. But he had time for no more than a glance before Mia and Traker pulled him away from the edge. "Revered! With us! You must lead us! We cannot stay!" He cursed and almost raised his Crozius to Mia, but the first laser beams had begun sweeping the balcony, carving at the rock and sending molten dribbles down the walls behind them. He nodded grimly and led them inside. In the debris-swathed halls all was din and confusion. The slave masters bellowed and flailed with their barbed whips, but their charges would not be ordered. Dahane realised someone had set off the fens on too early. Their thralls ran to and fro, shrieking and swinging their clubs, pistols spitting and making the stone chamber a hell of sparks and ricochets. Bullets spanged off Dahane's armour as he shouldered his way through the crowd of naked, bleeding berserkers. "To me! They are upon us! We will cut them down here! To me!" And Dahane began the chant of Martio Secundus. All around him word-bearers turned and began to fall in behind him, dark red helmets bearing down on him above the sea of bobbing cultist heads. Roars and growls began to mix with the cries of the mortals. The beastfolk were following too. Dahane gave a snarling grin behind his faceplate. "In Lorgar's name, we will make a fight of this yet." Reaching the great stair, they found that the whole part of the wall had gone, simply vanished, leaving smooth stone edges where a piece had been erased, a distort cannon crater, and the ceiling above it was already beginning to groan and send down streams of dust. He ignored the danger, sent his chant ringing out again, and charged through the crater to the hall beyond. The hangar and teleport dais were close. Then, swooping and darting through the breaches their cannon had made, came the Eldar. Aspect warriors all in blue, thrumming wings spreading from their shoulders. Lasers stabbed down into the throng underneath them, and grenades fell from their hands like petals. "Fight!" Dahane bellowed, and now that he was in battle he roared the Martio Tarsius and sent a fan of bolt shells screaming through the squadron, smashing two hawks backwards into the wall in clouds of smoke. His Crozius, twisted into the head of a one-eyed bull, was belching streams of red plasma that hung in the air when he moved it. It had not boasted the blue power field of the Imperial Crozet for 8,000 years. The remaining hawks tumbled gracefully in the air and glided towards the ruined wall, now with other shots chasing them. But then the braying of the beast folk changed note. Dahane whirled to see three of them firing wildly, looking about them in panic, caught in a silvery mist. All three seemed to twitch and heave and fall oddly out of shape before they collapsed into piles of filth on the stone floor. Beyond them, two warp spider warriors sucked the filament clouds back into the muzzles of their weapons. While shells from Dahane and Mia took one apart, the other stepped back. With a gesture, the air flowed around it like water, and it was gone. Down the hall and up the broad stairs, running hard, Duxea came pounding out of the smoke, plasma gun clutched in his hands. The hangar was filled with smoke and flashes of light. "The hangar is gone, Lord! Taken! We opened the gates to take the tanks down the ramps to the ground, but they drove us back with their strange weapons, and their heavy tanks are bombarding us. The teleport platform is destroyed. I have set the Martio quarters for our fallen, and my brothers have dug in to hold them at bay, but we cannot stay here." Dahane almost groaned aloud. "I will not be driven like an animal," This is my fortress. I will stand to defend it. But his soldier's instincts had taken charge and were giving the lie to his words. He was already moving back down the stairs to meet the last of the Marines, and a gaggle of thralls struggling up to meet him. He looked at them for a moment, and did not flinch, as a fire prism, fired through the hangar doors, opened a dazzling sphere of yellow-white fire over their heads.
The deepmost chamber, then, and the Great Hall. We will cut them down as they enter, until our brothers can land. When the transports land, the rest of our crusade, the battle will turn soon enough.
They hammered down the stairs. Beside them, a glare came through the window slits, and then the rock wall flashed red hot and crumpled as the Marines next to it hurled themselves away. The sleek alien tank, which had opened the breach, rose out of sight, and the jet box behind it. No Guardian craft these, but the smoky grey, green, and bright silver of the shining spears. Through a delicate cat's cradle of lasers, through the opening, thralls yowled and fell, while the beast folk sent bullets and shot blasting out of the opening as the jet bikes peeled off and rose out of sight. Then, the word bearers were in the chapel. The shadowy space and echoes calming Dahane, the familiar shape of the war obelisk, giving him strength. They fanned out into the chamber, around the upper gallery and the floor itself, needing no orders. Within seconds the doors were covered. The pack of thralls and beast folk huddled and muttered in the centre of the chamber, clutching weapons.
Revered, we are beset on every side.
Nessen's voice was flat and hoarse with anger.
I feel them at the gates, fighting our brothers and slaves, but they are above us too. They are breaching the upper walls and stepping onto the balconies from their grab sleds. And, most revered lord.
Suddenly, Nassen's voice was drenched with misery, and even the heads of the warriors around him were turning.
Our battle barge, our fortress, I see it reeling in space, revered. It is ringed by the enemy. Their ships dance away from our guns. Our brothers are preparing their landings. The shields have been lowered for the teleport to work. The Eldar are tearing at it. My vision is dimming.
There was silence in the chapel for a moment after Nissan's voice died away. Dahane thought of trying to reach the Sensoria array in the spires above them, then push the useless thought away. The upper levels would be full of Eldar scum by now, and by the time they could fight their way there, his ship would indeed have been blasted from the sky. He looked around.
Alone then. Alone with our hatred. I will hear no talk of flight. They will break against us as a wave against a cliff. Lorgar is with us. Chaos is within us. Damnation clothes us, and none can stand against us.
As they all said the blessing, Dahane's eyes moved from one to the next. Mir cradling his bolter, seemingly deep in thought. Duck's Eye standing haughtily with plasma gun held at arms. Traquair glaring about him for any sign of weakness in the others. Chainsword starting to flex and rev. Dahane raised his Crozarius and strode from the chapel, the others following, and as if on a signal they heard the bombardment outside begin again. It was only fitting that Dahane and his retinue marched into the north end of the ruined Great Hall at the same time that the Eldar filled it south. They had blown in the walls and shot the bronze doors apart and were fanning out through the ruins. Dahane leapt down the steps into the hall, letting the dust and smoke blur his outline as shots clipped the columns around him, and his men returned fire from the archway. A plasma grenade exploded nearby, an instant of scorching whiteness that betrayed the Eldar. In the instant that it blinded them, the word bearers had launched their own advance, scrambling and vaulting over the rubble. There were insect-quick movements ahead, and Dahane fired by reflex, plucking the Guardians out of their positions before he had consciously registered their location. The soft thrum of shuriken guns was drowned out by the hammer and yowl of the word-bearers' bolt shells. A stream of white energy flashed by Dahane's shoulder as Duck's Eye felled two more Eldar, but there were dire Avengers in the Eldar positions now. Their quicker reflexes and a hawk-eye aim to catch Duck's Eye before he could move again. The shuriken
were monomolecular, too fast and thin to properly see, but the air around Druck's eye seemed to shimmer and flash. Blood and ceramite gouted from his back as his torso flew apart, the eyes on his armour glazing over. He staggered back and Dahane jinked around him, launching himself into battle. A grenade went off somewhere to his left, and shrapnel clipped his armour. The word-bearer felt the moist embrace of the plates around his body jump and twitch with the pain. He brought his Crozius up and over, its wolf head yowling with both joy and pain, and belching thick red plasma. It caught the Avenger square in its judging helmet, and the creature twitched for a moment, only before the glowing crimson mist ate it down to the bone. The bolt pistol hammered in his hand, and two more Eldar crashed backwards, twitching and tumbling just beyond them. Triker cleared a fallen column in a great leap and landed among yellow-armoured striking scorpions whose chainswords sang and sparked against his own. In the rubble, Mir led the others in laying down a crossfire that strewed alien corpses across a third of the hall. Dahane sang the Martio Tartius in a clear, strong voice and shot the nearest scorpion in the back. Triker screamed laughter and swung at another, but as he backpedaled, another scorpion, in the heavy, intricate armour of an exarch, glided forward and whirled a many-chained crystalline flail in an intricate figure that smashed both Trachea's shoulders and left him standing, astonished and motionless, for a blow that stove in his helm and sent ceramite splinters flying. Dahane bellowed a battle curse, and his Crozius head became a snake that lashed and hissed. 2 short steps forward, and he lunged, feinted, and struck the flail out of the creature's hand. It reeled back into Mir's sights, the plasma eating at it, even as shells riddled it. But in the time it took for Dahane to strike down the last scorpion, the hall was alive with Eldar again, and Mir and Nissan were forced back and away from him by a shower of grenades and sighing filament webs as the blast from the distort cannon scraped the roof off the hall and let in the raging sky. Even as Dahane charged, fired and struck again and again, some distant part of him groaned. Faint, maddening alien thoughts brushed his own like spider silk in the dark. The shadows danced at the upper edge of his vision as jet bikes and vipers circled. The air around him was alive with shuriken fire and energy bolts. The Eldar melted away as he struck this way and that. Ancient stone burst into hot shards as he swung his Crozius, but rage had taken his discipline, and like a man trying to snatch smoke in his fingers, he found himself standing and roaring wordlessly as the hall emptied once more and the shots died away. There were no voices, no cries from his companions. Dahane did not have to turn to look to know that this last assault had taken them all. Mir and Nessun were dead, and behind him he could hear the boom of masonry as his citadel began to crumble. The prayer of sacrifice in the Martial quarters would not come to his numb lips, and he nodded to himself. Why should not his rites unravel along with everything else? The Chaos Star set in his Rosarius was dead, lackluster. He looked at it dully, and that was when he began to feel something tugging at his mind. It was like an electrical tingle, or the distant sound of crickets, the way the air feels before a storm, or the thrum of distant war machines. Dahane's warp-tuned mind rang with the nearby song of power. He remembered Nissan, speaking of the pattern that Farseer's minds made when they assembled. You will set your eyes. Suddenly, he was running again. No scream now, just a low moan in his throat. A tangle of savage emotions he could not have put a name to if he tried. Blood trickled from his lips, and his Crozius thrummed and crackled. The gates of the cathedral hung like broken wings. He ducked between them to stand on the broad black steps of his dying fortress. On the heart of Varantha. His Crozius head had fallen silent, and he looked at it in puzzlement. It had formed itself into a human face, mouth gaping, eyes wide. A face that Dahane recognised as his own, from back in the days before his helm had sealed itself to him. Turn, Dahane. Turn and face me. The voice did not come through his ears, but seemed to resonate out of the air and throughout his bones and brain. It was measured, almost somber, and its simple force almost shook him to his knees. Slowly, he raised his head. And all will come to an end. More than twice Dahane's height, the immense figure stood with its spear at rest. It took a step forward out of the smoke that had wreathed it to the centre of the plaza. Dahane watched the blood drip from its hand and stain the grey stones on the ground. It stood and regarded him, and there was none of the expected madness or fury in the white-hot pits of its baleful eyes, only a brooding patience that was far more terrifying. He took a step forward. All the fury had gone like the snuffling of a candle. Now there was just wrenching despair which drove everything else from his mind. He wondered how long ago Varanthus Farseers had realised he was hunting them. How long ago they had begun cultivating his hate. How long ago they had begun to set this trap for him. He wondered if the Farseer, whose prophecy he had thought to fulfill, was laughing at him now from within its spirit stone. He stood, alone, on the steps, and the air was silent but for the hiss of heat from the incandescent iron skin and the faint keening from the weapon in one giant hand. Then the lines from the Pentadict danced through his mind, the lines with which Lorgar had closed his testament as his own death came upon him. Proud and defiant hate, spite and harsh oblivion, let the great jewel knot of the cosmos unravel in the dust. He looked up again, his mind suddenly clear and calm. He raised his Crozius, but the salute was not returned. No matter. He took a pace forward and down the steps, that volcanic gaze on him all the time. He walked faster, now jogging. He worked the action on his pistol with the heel of his hand. Running, its eyes on him. Charging now, feet hammering, voice found at last in a wail of defiance. Chaplain Dahane ran like a demon across the last battlefield to where the avatar of Kayla Mancha Kane stood, its smoking, shrieking spear in its vast hands, waiting for him. Thanks for watching, everybody, and please do give this video a like. Even if you didn't enjoy it, I'd appreciate it either way. Also remember to subscribe if you're not subscribed, and to hit the bell so you get notified of when I do stuff. This story is part of the Let the Galaxy Burn compilation, and you can find a link for that below. If you'd like to support my channel and my work on this channel, please do consider becoming either a channel member on YouTube, which gives you some perks, or also on the Patreon for as little as $1. But anyway, thank you all very much for watching. More stuff coming up soon, and yeah, thanks very much. I'll see you next time. Cheers.
Yeah, I guess I'm the only one here, you know? It's fine. Since I can't get Space Marine 2 to run. Red dice.
The Great Thief. Outside, the storm winds blew. Colossal lightning bolts slashed the night-black sky. The glowing surface of the sour sea roiled, and gigantic reptilian heads emerged from its turgid ooze. Within the great fortress of Nagashizar, undead things went about their slow business, unaware of the cold wind's kiss, unaware of the deathly chill
unaware of anything except the eons-old purpose that their master's dark will had imbued them with long, long ago. Nagash sat on his throne of human skulls and brooded. He was dimly aware of the storm's roaring. It intruded on his thoughts like the buzzing of a gnat, drawing him from his reverie back to the reality that surrounded him. Slowly, he became aware of the gigantic throne room, littered with the bones of supplicants who had displeased him. Slowly, he recognized the rotting drapes that depicted scenes that only he, of all sentient things, could remember. Slowly, he became aware of the tiny flickers of dark power that animated the tens of thousands of undead creatures about him. To the witch sight of the great necromancer, they were tiny, constantly burning flames, visible through the miles of rock that surrounded his tower. Slowly, he became aware that there was a flame present that did not possess a constant dark glow. It was bright and flickered with many colors. The red of anger, the blazing yellow of fear, the sickly purple of overwhelming greed. If the great necromancer could have smiled, he would have. It had been a long time since any puny mortal had dared invade his realm. He wondered why they came. True, the cursed pit was full of the gold and jewels that mortals prized. After 4 long millennia, Nagash failed to understand what they saw in such baubles. The gems and the bullion would last longer than the flesh of those who desired them. Surely, they must be trivial, meaningless. Dimly, the memory of wealth and what wealth meant to men came back to Nagash. He recalled the luxury of his palace in Kemri and the desire for the gratification of the senses. Even then, he had been different from most mortals. He had never understood the true attraction of the world's treasures. Even then, he had been all too aware of how transitory all wealth and fame were. He had known that death was the greatest thief of all, and would take all that he owned in the end. He recalled that he had vowed then that he would cheat death and outwit the greatest of thieves, and he had, although in the end, the price had been terrible. The memory flickered through his mind like a lotus dream. The images vividly illuminated his thoughts like a lightning flash, and then were gone. He had seen and done so much that he could not recall a tenth of it. His brain had been rotted away by too much warpstone, and too many returns from beyond the grave. He knew there were great gaps in his knowledge and in his memories. He was not sure that he wished to recall them. There had been many defeats as well as triumphs in his long unlife. Defeat was close now. He had entered the great hall and stood in the doorway almost a mile away, overwhelmed by the immensity of what he saw. Nagash watched his aura flicker and saw the blue of resolution overcome the burning yellow of terror. The man advanced into the chamber, unaware that his doom was at hand. Memory came back to Nagash. He remembered another awakening. He recalled emerging from a drugged stupor to confront his ancient enemy, the king of Al-Qadaiza. It should have been the moment of his greatest triumph. He had just succeeded in reanimating an entire kingdom. The greatest army the world had ever seen was at his command. Ultimate power was within his taloned grasp. Instead, he had awoken to face a terrible blade that had rent his flesh and brought searing pain to his soul. Triumph had proved transitory, as all living things. He flexed his metal claw, recalling that once it had been a hand of flesh. There were times when he still felt the pain of its severing, as victims of amputation were said to feel the presence of their limbs sometimes. The slight sound of metal on stone echoed through the chamber. Nagash enjoyed
a surge of stark terror in the interloper. Briefly, he wondered how the creature had slipped past the sentries of the tower. He studied him more closely and saw that the human was knotted around with a complex field of power. Nagash's curiosity was satisfied. The human wore a charm sufficient to baffle the dim senses of most of his undead lackeys. They simply could not perceive him. The thief clutched in one hand a blade that was potent by mortal standards. Measured by the great necromancers, it was a child's toy. Satisfied that the man bore nothing that could threaten his long existence, Nagash resolved to let him live a few minutes longer. After all, what did it matter in the great scheme of things? For long minutes the man waited. He stood frozen to the spot, convinced, like a rabbit before a serpent, that immobility would save him. Nagash could almost have pitied him, save for the fact that pity, like all other human emotions, was but the dimmest of memories to him. After a period of minutes, the man's monkey impatience betrayed him, and he moved again, making his way slowly, cautiously, silently across the chamber, till he stood at the very foot of Nagash's gigantic throne. He paused there for a heartbeat and looked up in wonder and terror. Briefly, Nagash wondered what he must look like to the man. It was simple curiosity. He had long since passed beyond the vanity of mankind about his appearance. His form suited his purpose, and his purpose was to inspire terror and live forever. In the end, it was the one reason he desired to bring the great undeaf to the world. Once all living things were his unliving slaves, no possible threat could rise to his eons-long existence. Then he would be safely beyond the reach of the great thief. Slowly, one step at a time, the interloper began to make his way up the stairs. At every step, a human skull rested below his feet. Nagash could see that the man could barely contain his fear, yet still he kept coming. His avarice was great indeed. Now the thief stood before Nagash himself, gazing up at the great figure that loomed nearly twice the height of a mortal man above him. He paused again, seemingly overcome by his own temerity. Then he clambered up onto the throne and tried to prise Nagash's jeweled claw from his withered arm. Nagash opened his eyes and looked down into the mortal's terrified face. The man shrieked and tumbled back from the throne, falling down the long flight of steps. The thief had a tumbler's grace, and a tumbler's trick of rolling with a fall without taking damage. He came to his feet at the foot of the throne and whipped his blade from his scabbard. Nagash laughed softly. The sound emerged from his throat like the rustling of poisoned serpents in a desert tomb. "Sigma, preserve me," the man muttered. It was the wrong thing to say. Painful memory flooded back into Nagash, memory of his greatest defeat by the man-god known as Sigma, in a contest that had cost him much of his power and another long and painful period of resurrection. Nagash resolved to spare the man not a moment longer. He turned the black gaze upon him. Bolts of pure dark magic leapt from the great necromancer's eyes and flashed directly at the cowering figure before him. Where the beams touched flesh, the man's skin blackened and withered and putrefied, sloughing away till the white gleam of bone was visible beneath. The rot spread swiftly, and the man's bubbling protests drowned as his throat turned to a horrid black pus and dribbled away onto the floor. Soon, only a skeleton, stripped of all meat, stood before the great necromancer. He held it upright by sheer force of will for a moment, and then let it collapse onto the floor, there to mingle with the bones of all the others. For a moment, Nagash considered returning to his long reverie, but slowly the thought occurred to him that he had lain dormant too long. He had recovered much of his strength, there was work to do. Slowly, like an old man rising from his sickbed, the great necromancer rose from his throne. Gathering strength with every stride, he made his way down the steps and strode across the audience chamber, crushing the bones of humans with every step. Thank you to all you guys supporting the channel. Your support really means a lot, and it really helps me out doing this. And if you would like to become a channel member or a Patreon, please follow the links below. Otherwise, just like the video, subscribe, and maybe to hit the bell so you get notified when I am doing stuff. Other than that, see you next time. Cheers. Bye.
Excuse me. Y'all can hear me. I'm thinking. I'm more than anything, which is probably not good.
Conversing with the damned, being a transcription of a dialogue between myself, Richter Clace, and that most infamous of heretics, the Marquis Alphonse Del Monte. The Marquis Alphonse Del Monte is the last in a long and noble line. Some say his family roots begin with the pirate lords of Sartosa, and that they only moved to Bretonia after amassing a considerable fortune from their corrupt activities, sometime in the 15th century of our Lord Sigmar. Whatever the case, the Marquis's father, Jean Chevalier, Comte del Monte, was a powerful and decadent man, a noble who ruled by sword and fear rather than any benevolent policy. And being a grossly debauched man, Jean Chevalier lived with 2 wives and was rumoured to have enjoyed countless lovers and courtesans throughout his life. Despite all this, Jean Chevalier was also a learned and free-thinking philosopher, his controversial writings finding their way across Bretonia and Astilia, and to our own dear empire. Suffice to say, Jean Chevalier came to a no-good end, and his son, Alphonse Del Monte, took up his father's libertine mantle with startling vigour. Though sent to train as a knight, as indeed all the young aristocracy of Bretonia are required to do, Del Monte never took to the life of a warrior, although it is said that he possessed a fiery spirit and showed considerable savagery in battle. He had no respect for his tutors and lacked the humility required to earn the spurs of knighthood. He left his training without a backward glance, and they say he never once showed the slightest remorse or shame for having done so. A terrible thing indeed to the honour-bound nobles of Bretonia. What followed was a life filled with extreme controversy and hedonism that even his late father's colourful reputation seemed dim by comparison. It was not long before Dolmans was brought before his king to account for his base and unchivalrous behaviour. This accounting turned into a criminal trial when suspicions were roused as to the true nature of Dolmonce's debauchery. Some suspected the hand of chaos in Dolmonce's deportment, but the Marquis denied all such accusations, giving this statement to the court. I am the Marquis Dolmonce. Within my veins flows the blood of some of the most distinguished and noble families of this fair realm, the same blood that flows through many of you, and as such I deserve to be heard. I was born to wealth and luxury, as indeed were all of you, and I was told from my earliest age that fate and the gods had surrounded me with such plenty because it was my destined right to possess them as a nobleman of Bretonia. I became the proud, imaginative, and irascible man I am today precisely because of this upbringing, and I freely admit that in the past I have entertained the notion that all other people were created solely to submit to my desires, and that all the world should seek to flatter my whims. In short, I say to you that I am my father's son, a product of what he and his fellow noblemen of Bretonia taught me to be. So indeed, I am what my circumstances have made me, and they have made me a true son of Bretonia. I see no reason why I should be penalised for matters and eventualities that are so clearly beyond my control. Del Monte was released shortly afterwards, although he was banished thenceforth from Bretonia. Disgraced and exiled from his own country, the Marquis settled in the free port of Marienburg. There he continued with his wicked ways, and in time his true nature became obvious to the local authorities. Dalmonte was apparently no longer content to enact his petty perversions, and so took the extreme step of establishing his own coven dedicated to the worship of Slaanesh. The success and eventual size of his coven was truly remarkable, helped in no small part by the Marquis's personal charm and fabulous wealth, and prompted the burgomeisters of Marienburg to take the unprecedented step of requesting special assistance from our own Templars of Sigmar. The witch hunters agreed, their only proviso being that should they find enough evidence to arrest Dalmonte, he would be deported to Altdorf for trial and execution. The burgomasters agreed, and Dalmonte was captured and brought to Altdorf to face his doom. Having witnessed Dalmonte's interrogation at the hands of Marshal Clement of the witch hunters, it has become apparent to me that despite his obvious deviancy, the Marquis is an extremely well-educated and erudite man. With the disposition granted to me by the theogenist Volkmar and the authority it grants me over certain canonical matters, I have been able to request a stay of execution for the Marquis, so that I may glean some first-hand wisdom as to the psychology and disposition of a chaos cultist. For his part, the Marquis agreed to speak with me, just so long as I was intending to talk with him, rather than, in his own words, preach the miserable doctrine of the Sigmarites. The man is a complete unrepentant. Although I know I should hate him for his crimes against our land and our holy church, I freely admit that the scholar in me finds it hard to despise one possessing such wit and intelligence as he. I began my conversation with him by stating that very fact. Here follows the transcription of his response and our subsequent conversation. And why should you? Herr Richter. After all, my misfortune is not a product of my own thoughts and acts so much as it is a product of the thoughts and acts of other, more petty-minded people. I'm an artist, scholar, and aesthete, and the fact that my beliefs do not match your own is no good reason for an intelligent man to give in to hatred. That is true, Marquis. But you must accept that this is more than just a case of religious intolerance on my part. You worship a prescribed deity, one that encourages you towards the most horrific acts in his name. It is a crime of your own austere religion that it insists all the works of the Chaos Gods are irredeemably horrific. Clearly this cannot be the case. Am I horrific? No, don't answer. I fear that Bor Sigmar has knocked too much sense out of you for you to give me a fair and reasoned reply. Think on this instead. If the Chaos Gods represent only suffering and ugliness, then they would surely gain few converts, and without the souls of converts to feed them and drive them on, their power would eventually begin to fade from our world. Why would they risk harming themselves by driving away the laity? So you believe chaos offers more than simple damnation? Of course I do. And it is more than simple belief, Richter. Much more. Chaos offers the quick fulfillment of dreams and gratifications of the self. And of all the gods of chaos, none make this offer more tempting than Lord Slaanesh. So you embraced evil simply for the gratification of the self, as you put it. You race ahead. Richter, define for me what you mean by evil. I would think that evil, at least in the context of a Slaanesh cultist like yourself, would mean debauchery and unutterable perversions, leading to a kind of selfish, hedonistic madness. How very specific of you. Well, I'm sure some of the more exuberant of my Lord Slaanesh's followers might have appeared as debauched and unutterably perverted, madmen, at least by your lights, but it is true to say that by far the majority of his mortal followers are civilized and educated people, just like me, just like you. Not like me, Dalmonte. You're so sure. I know many a cleric has turned away from his dour religion to the more tangible delights of Slaanesh. What makes you think you are so different? I know that I could never find joy in the cruel perversities expected by your foul god. Foul? Is joy foul? Why do you assume that the Lord of Delight expects only perversity from his followers? Slaanesh is, among so many other things, the personified manifestation of pleasure. And, more importantly, the desire to experience pleasure. How we generate that pleasure is not important to him. The fact that we experience it at all is enough. You are trying to tell me that your god has no interest in debauchery? We both know that isn't true. I have no doubt that Slaanesh takes his delight from all acts that gratify the senses, but, if I may say so, you are far too obsessed with what you call debauchery. For all our apparent intelligence, we humans are creatures of nature. Every emotion and drive that we experience, and therefore every act we initiate, is a product of our natural state of being, and not simply pressed on us by some insidious external force. So you are saying that Slaanesh does not promote hedonism in his name? Not at all. I'm trying to say that the gods are but reflections of our own emotions and drives. They are a product of our own desires, not their own. You cannot condemn any one of them for what they are or what they do, for they are simply projections of those processes that make us human. They are us and we are they. But the Chaos Gods represent only extremes. There is no virtue in any one of them. Oh, Richter, why must you Sigmarites always drone on about virtue, as if you alone were the keepers of it? An educated man such as yourself must have studied history. You must have seen that there is no eternal morality, but a shifting mass of beliefs that change from age to age. And so for all those things you regard as virtues, why, they are just named responses that have been conditioned by variables, the world we men have constructed around ourselves, and the geography that the world is built upon, and then inflicted upon us. Virtue is a word born from a lack of imagination, and a fear of experimenting with what it is to be human, or rather a fear of seeing ourselves for what we really are. You seem to forget the reality of your immortal soul, Marquis. What will happen to you when you die, and your foul god comes to claim your soul? Where will your libertine sensibilities leave you then? Ah, your reasoning becomes clearer to me now. So, fear of punishment in the hereafter is the driving force behind your morality. I might have guessed. Well, then I put this to you. If Slaanesh is indeed the product and personification of all delight and pleasure, then perhaps he is not so terrifying a god as you might think. Whereas you have mentioned ad nauseum that my god is often one of sensual excess, he must always be a god of contentment, joy, and honest satisfaction. But you look skeptical. I understand, Richter. I felt the same as you must do now when I first learned the truth. It's so easy for us to accept that a god of chaos is present in the debased acts of rape or sadism, but a far harder thing indeed for us to accept that he is also a product of feelings generated by love and aesthetic appreciation. But it's the truth. Slaanesh's influence extends to all those things that give us pleasure, in whatever way, shape or form they take, including, therefore, all endeavours that are passionate and creative. Though I would happily debate with you against the existence of an afterlife at all, if by some stretch of the imagination there is one waiting for us beyond the veil of death. Perhaps mine will be somewhat more enjoyable than the one offered by your grey and authoritarian god. You are seeking to undermine my beliefs, Dalmancy. It won't work. I have read the reports from soldiers fighting along our northern borders. Slaanesh is a source of suffering and debasement. That is all. If it were as simple as that, why do you think so many artistic and philosophical institutions have been found to hide a cult to Slaanesh? The reason romantics and idealists and intellectuals are attracted to Slaanesh is precisely because he is the greatest patron and product of beauty, love and aestheticism, and all the sensual pleasures of art, music and companionship empower him. Even the contentment I assume you glean from worshipping the Heldenhammer is a form of pleasure, and therefore empowering to my lord Slaanesh. No. This is a pointless conversation, Dalmancy. This consultation is over. How like your kind to be frightened by simple truths. Ask yourself this. Would it be so difficult to embrace a god that asks you only to take greater pleasure in the wine you drink or the food you eat? How tempting would it be to be able to take the same enjoyment from the simplest things in life as you would from some great achievement or intellectual endeavour? How could this not be attractive? I told my scribe to cease his transcription at this point. I've begun to comprehend the insidious and seductive nature that so typifies Slanesh and its servants. But I am strong in my faith. I will not be lured from the path of righteousness by anyone, least of all by a jaded Bretonnian with a silver tongue. I am resolved to speak to Dalmancy again, for I am certain there is much I can learn from him yet. Next time we speak, I shall be mindful to keep the conversation away from the more esoteric aspects of his beliefs. Thanks very much, everybody. Hope you enjoyed that. I think it was a quality little scene. Okay, I'm going to go. Thanks very much for watching. If you'd like to support the channel that these brave chaps here have, this list of honour, then you can follow the links below, and I'd really appreciate that. Otherwise, if you won't mind giving the video a like, and subscribe if you're not subscribed, and remember to hit the bell so you get notified when I do stuff. See you next time. Thanks for watching. Cheers.
What's it called? Space Marine. I'm going to try to see if I can get Space Marine to work. You know? Why do I... There we go. Space Marine, I'm going to try to get it to work. If it doesn't... Well, crap. That sucks. Yeah. Alright. Let's see if I can get Space Marine to work. Let's see. Steam. It says I've played 5 hours, but I haven't even gotten it to load. Which is really annoying, you know? Just look at this. Come on. Come on. Yay! Alright, let's see what's wrong. What's going on? Let's see how this is printing. Not too bad. Alright. You know what? It's what? Been 2.5 hours? I'm gonna stop streaming. Thank you guys for showing up. I'm gonna see if I can get this stupid thing to work.